Chapter 1081. On the way back after leaving Great Senior Tianyun's cave house, Tianyu looked at Xiaochen with a smile and said, "Why? You don't want to go to above heavens? Are you afraid of dying in there with me?" Facing Tianyu's teasing, Xiaochen turned to look at her. Although this little girl was about the same age as him, her character was extremely lively and cheerful. She was also extraordinarily courageous. She only wanted to see the world in chaos. Hearing her words, Xiaochen said angrily, "What's the use of being afraid? Knowing that it's a fire pit, I still have to jump in." After spending some time together, Xiaochen and Tianyu had become familiar with each other, so they could joke around when they talked. Neither of them would take it to heart. Hearing Xiaochen's words, Tianyu rolled her eyes. But before she could speak, Xiaochen continued, but his voice was obviously laughing a lot. Moreover, his tone was also very low. "Moreover, I don't want to see you fallen above heavens like the previous first Holy Son and Holy Maiden of 9 heavens." Xiaochen's sudden words made Tianyu stunned, but then she smiled again, but there was a hint of sweetness in her smile. Perhaps it was because Xiaochen was the first man to say such words to her. As the first Holy Maiden of 9 heavens, Tianyu's identity destined the men around her to stay away from her. It was even more impossible for them to say anything to protect her because Tianyu didn't need anyone to protect her at all. Now, Tianyu could feel the care and concern from Xiaochen, and she felt warm in her heart. It was unknown what Tianyu was thinking at this time. Xiaochen was a little conflicted about above heavens, but at the same time, he was also looking forward to it. After all, this was a small world built by a great sage. What kind of existence was a great sage? Xiaochen didn't know, but Xiaochen understood that a quasi-sage was almost not worth mentioning in front of a great sage. Let's put it this way. If the North Star Realm had a great saint at this time, they didn't need one. As long as there was one, the situation of the entire North Star Realm would be completely different. At that time, it would most likely be a situation where only one of them reigned supreme. It was a pity that there hadn't been a great saint in the North Star Realm for many years. The extinction of the Great Saint had also led to everyone knowing that there was still the existence of the Great Saint realm above the Quasi-Saint realm. However, no one knew how Quasi-Saints broke through to the Great Saint realm. Did they rely on the power of the Source? I'm afraid that's not all. It was related to the Great Sage, so above heavens was very dangerous. At the same time, it was also very tempting. Especially for people like Xiaochen, the temptation of above heavens was extremely huge. The danger to his life was nothing to Xiaochen. After all, Xiaochen had been through a lot of dangers along the way. Moreover, if it weren't for these dangers, would Xiaochen still be able to reach his current height? Danger and opportunity often coexisted. Therefore, Xiaochen quickly adjusted his mentality and even had a sense of longing for the trip to above heavens. He returned to the small courtyard where he lived. Before parting, Xiaochen said to Tianyu, "Prepare well. Since there's a glimmer of hope, I think we'd better work hard to grasp it." "I don't need you to say that. I'm not someone who wants to die. If I can live, who wants to die? You should be the one who should prepare well. Otherwise, wouldn't your 3 wives be heartbroken?" Humph. Hearing Xiaochen's words, Tianyu snorted softly, then turned and left. Neither of them noticed that Tianyu's tone became a little strange when she talked about Xiaochen's 3 wives. After sending Tianyu off, Xiaochen returned to the courtyard and met with the 5 saints of the 9 firmaments. He also told them in detail about his meeting with Supreme Sovereign Tianyun. When they heard that Supreme Sovereign Tianyun had agreed to form an alliance with the Sacred Palace, the 5 of them were overjoyed. But when they heard that Supreme Sovereign Tianyun wanted Xiaochen and Tianyu to enter above heavens together, they immediately fell silent. Saint Danyun was the first to reject. "Chener, you can't. You can't enter above heavens. It's too dangerous." Saint Danyun was the first to disagree. Soon after, the 9 firmament saint and the others also spoke up. They didn't agree with Xiaochen entering above heavens because it was too dangerous. Since the 5 of them didn't agree with Xiaochen entering above heavens, Xiaochen could only patiently persuade them. It's fine. Although above heavens is dangerous, it's not certain death. Also, this is the only way 9 firmaments will agree to form an alliance with the sacred palace. After persuading them patiently, Xiaochen's persuasion and Xiaochen's determination, the 5 of them reluctantly agreed. However, the 5 of them still gave Xiaochen their pills and talismans so that he could keep them for himself when he entered above heavens. Xiaochen naturally wouldn't refuse the talismans and pills given to him by the 5 of them. He knew that these things were life-saving treasures, and the more he had, the better his chances of survival would be. After handing over many pills and talismans, Xiaochen discussed with the 5 of them. Tomorrow, Supreme Sovereign Tianyun would send people to the sacred palace. Xiaochen's intention was for the 5 of them to return with him. As for himself, he would stay in 9 firmaments and return to the sacred palace after the matter with above heavens was concluded. Xiaochen had his own opinions. Therefore, the 5 saints had no choice but to agree to Xiaochen's decision, even though they were reluctant to do so. The next morning, as expected, Grand Elder Tianyun sent 3 saints from the 9 heavens over. Moreover, there was a holy son accompanying them. Xiaochen had seen this person before. It was indeed the 5th holy son of the 9 heavens, Ziyu. However, Ziyu was much more obedient this time and didn't provoke Xiaochen. On the contrary, he was extremely low-key. Xiaochen was naturally happy to see this happen. Sending Ziyu and the 3 saints to the sacred palace was a show of the importance 9 firmaments placed on this alliance. Without wasting any time, the group left 9 firmaments on the same day and hurried towards the sacred palace. As such, Xiaochen was left alone in 9 firmaments. After sending off the 9 firmament saints, Xiaochen spent the next 2 days very relaxed. He didn't cultivate, nor did he go out. Instead, he did his best to prepare for above heavens, adjusting himself to his peak condition. 2 days passed in the blink of an eye. On the 3rd day, Tianyu found Xiaochen early in the morning and brought Xiaochen to the lake in the depths of 9 firmaments. When the 2 arrived, Supreme Sovereign Tianyun and the other quasi-saint from 9 firmaments were already waiting. Seeing the 2 arrive, Supreme Sovereign Tianyun smiled at Xiaochen, while the other quasi-saint Supreme Sovereign expressionlessly said to Xiaochen, 9 firmaments has already agreed to form an alliance with the sacred palace. You must do your best to help Tianyu obtain the Heavenly Emperor's record. If I find out that you're cheating, the alliance will be nullified. Begging for collection, begging for monthly votes, begging for recommendations. End of chapter. Chapter 1082. Compared to Supreme Sovereign Tianyun, this male Supreme Sovereign's attitude towards Xiaochen was much worse. He spoke as if he was interrogating a criminal. Of course, this male Supreme Sovereign was also a Supreme Sovereign. Xiaochen wouldn't go all out to help Tianyu, so he felt the need to warn Xiaochen not to play any tricks. Xiaochen ignored the male Supreme Sovereign's reprimand. Instead, he turned to Supreme Sovereign Tianyun and asked, "Where are we going to enter above heavens?" The male Grand Monarch was infuriated by Xiaochen's action, and he bellowed with a dark expression. "You!" The male Grand Monarch snarled. He was clearly angered by Xiaochen's disregard, but fortunately, Supreme Sovereign Tianyun stopped him in time. "Alright, since we have chosen to form an alliance, we have to trust each other. Xiaochen is the first chosen of the sacred palace. I don't think he's that weak. Since he said he would help Tianyu, he will definitely do his best." Supreme Sovereign Tianyun believed in Xiaochen. Of course, a large part of the reason was because Tianyu had put in a lot of good words for her. As soon as Supreme Sovereign Tianyun's voice fell, the male Supreme Sovereign didn't say anything else and just snorted coldly. At the same time, Supreme Sovereign Tianyun turned to Xiaochen again and said with a smile, "Anytime. Do you see this whirlpool?" As she spoke, Supreme Venerable Tianyun pointed. Xiaochen looked in the direction of her finger and saw a whirlpool with a diameter of more than 10 meters on the surface of the lake. It was constantly spinning above the lake. This is the entrance to the above heavens. the above heavens was built by the heavenly emperor Great Sage. Therefore, the entrance will only open on a certain day every month. Apart from that, even we can't open the entrance. Today is the day the entrance opens. The two of you can enter the above heavens anytime, explained Great Paragon Tianyun. Against the above heavens, Great Paragon Tianyun and the others were helpless. The seals left behind by the heavenly emperor Great Sage were too terrifying. Even they couldn't break them. Therefore, they could only follow the rules of the heavenly emperor Great Sage. Looking at the entrance to above heavens, Xiaochen pondered for a moment before turning to Tianyu and saying, "Let's go." Now that things had come to this, there was no longer any need to hesitate. No matter how dangerous the heavens realm was, they had no choice but to give it a try. Tianyu nodded after hearing Xiaochen's words. Subsequently, the two of them jumped into the whirlpool under the gazes of Supreme Sovereign Tianyun and another male Supreme Sovereign. They quickly disappeared. Watching the two disappear, Supreme Sovereign Tianyun's eyes flashed with a complicated look. She prayed in her heart, "Girl, you must succeed." It was unknown when it started, but roaming the above heavens seemed to have become the mission of every holy son and holy daughter of the nine heavens. Almost every holy son and holy daughter of the nine heavens had died in the above heavens, and Tianyu was no exception. However, Supreme Sovereign Tianyun was extremely worried about this, but it was too late to say anything now. Are we really going to form an alliance with the Sacred Palace?" The male Supreme Sovereign snorted coldly. Upon hearing this, Supreme Venerate Tianyun said with some dissatisfaction, "Saint Child Xiaochen has already kept his promise by entering above heavens with Tianyu. What, as a quasi-sage Supreme Venerate, are you going to go back on your word? But the Sacred Palace is an outsider after all, so what if it's an outsider? Can you find someone more suitable than Holy Son Xiaochen to accompany Tianyu to the Heavenly Emperor's sky?" Supreme Sovereign Tianyun said coldly. Xiaochen kept his promise, and Supreme Sovereign Tianyun wouldn't go back on her word either. The male Supreme Sovereign's expression turned ugly after being reprimanded by Supreme Sovereign Tianyun, but he still sighed in the end. "All right, I'll leave it to you." With that, the male Supreme Sovereign left, leaving Supreme Sovereign Tianyun standing on the spot and looking at the entrance to the above heavens for a while. But after a while, she also left. No one could help Xiaochen and Tianyu in the above heavens. They could only rely on their own luck. After the two Supreme Sovereigns left, Xiaochen and Tianyu passed through the entrance and entered the above heavens. It was no different from the outside world, with blue skies and white clouds. The only difference was that the above heavens seemed to be an uncivilized world. The entire above heavens gave off an ancient and backward feeling. Looking around, there were dense forests everywhere. After sizing up the surroundings, Xiaochen turned to Tianyu and asked, "Do you have any clues as to where the Heaven Emperor record is located in the above heavens?" He still didn't know how big the above heavens was. If Tianyu had a rough location, it would undoubtedly be much easier to find it. Tianyu didn't hide anything when she heard Xiaochen's question. "I know. Above the nine heavens, the above heavens is actually composed of 9 independent small worlds." After entering above heavens, Tianyu told Xiaochen everything she knew. However, after hearing Tianyu's explanation, Xiaochen suddenly felt like he had been cheated. He originally thought that he had placed a lot of importance on the above heavens, but who knew that the real above heavens was much more dangerous than he had imagined. First of all, the above heavens was composed of 9 independent small worlds. These 9 small worlds were connected to each other, but they were also a whole. As for the Heaven Emperor record, it was located at the highest 9 heavens. As for where Xiaochen and Tianyu were now, it was located at the lowest first heaven. In other words, if they wanted to obtain the Heaven Emperor record, Xiaochen and Tianyu would have to overcome all difficulties and reach the 9th heaven. Only then would they have a chance of obtaining the Heaven Emperor record. However, it was extremely difficult to reach the 9th heaven. This was because every time they ascended a heaven, they would have to go to the center of that heaven. Only there would be a passage to the next heaven. Right now, we should be at the edge of the first heaven. In other words, if we want to reach the second heaven, we have to advance towards the center? Xiaochen asked. N. Tianyu nodded in response. Alright, he had still underestimated the above heavens. Although he still didn't know what dangers lay in the above heavens, Xiaochen was certain that it wouldn't be easy. However, there was no turning back now. They could only brace themselves and advance. Standing up, Xiaochen and Tianyu walked towards the center of the first heaven. They didn't know how big the first heaven was, but when Xiaochen and Tianyu walked through the dense forest, they were incomparably careful. They were constantly on guard against every movement in their surroundings, fearing that they would be suddenly attacked by something. Begging for collection, begging for monthly votes, begging for recommendations. End of chapter. Chapter 1083. Because they were very careful along the way, Xiaochen and Tianyu's speed wasn't fast. It could even be said that they were very slow. However, what was a little strange was that after walking for about 4 hours, the two didn't encounter any danger. Slowly, Tianyu relaxed a little. However, Xiaochen didn't agree with this and even reminded her. Don't relax, be careful. Nothing happened. This wasn't good news for Xiaochen. One must know that this sky above heavens had buried many generations of holy sons and holy daughters of 9 heavens. Would this sky above heavens be ordinary if it could make so many holy sons and holy daughters fall here? Obviously not. Therefore, the peace along the way didn't mean safety in Xiaochen's opinion. On the contrary, this kind of peace gave people a strange feeling all the time. However, in the face of Xiaochen's slightly reprimanding reminder, Tianyu did not take it to heart. She curled her lips and said, what danger is there? We have been walking for almost 4 hours and nothing has happened. Moreover, this is only the first heaven, so it should be the simplest. I think we should not waste our energy here. You know, there are 9 heavens above the heavens, and the higher you go, the more difficult it is. The little girl wasn't convinced. She felt that Xiaochen was a little too cautious and sensitive. However, Xiaochen completely scoffed at this. He was getting more and more familiar with Tianyu. Xiaochen also knew that this girl's growth process could be described as smooth sailing. First of all, her background wasn't bad. She could already be considered as one of the top in the sky race. Secondly, she had shown excellent talent since she was young. Then, she entered 9 heavens early and received the vigorous training of 9 heavens. In the end, she became the holy daughter of 9 heavens. Until now, she was even the first holy daughter of 9 heavens. Her growth experience could be said to be smooth sailing. This also meant that Tianyu actually didn't experience any setbacks. On the other hand, Xiaochen was able to reach this step today because Xiaochen had experienced countless hardships. Therefore, in terms of survival skills, Xiaochen was definitely several streets ahead of Tianyu. This had nothing to do with strength, but came from experience and a sense of danger. It was precisely because he had experienced so many life and death crises that Xiaochen had an almost instinctive intuition towards the approaching danger. After entering the first sky, Xiaochen felt that something was wrong. Therefore, even though nothing happened along the way, Xiaochen still didn't relax his vigilance. The little girl didn't believe him, so Xiaochen didn't say anything else. He knew very well that it was almost impossible to make Tianyu listen to him. The girl was arrogant, and she was the first holy maiden of the 9 heavens. Xiaochen naturally couldn't order her around. Tianyu thought that everything was fine and secretly relaxed. On the other hand, Xiaochen's nerves were stretched taut as he vigilantly observed the surroundings for any signs of trouble. About half an hour later, Tianyu, who had been following behind Xiaochen and had completely relaxed, suddenly let out a shriek. Upon hearing Tianyu's shriek, Xiaochen turned around immediately and saw a black vine wrapped tightly around Tianyu's ankle, pulling her out of danger into the dense forest behind. It was a very strange attack. Just as Xiaochen was focusing all his attention on Tianyu, he heard Tianyu, who had been struggling non-stop, suddenly shout. "Xiaochen, be careful." Behind you, Tianyu reminded him, but it was too late. A similar vine climbed up Xiao Chen's neck at lightning speed and strangled Xiao Chen. Xiao Chen and Tianyu were both strangled by the strange vines. However, Xiao Chen and Tianyu were no ordinary people. Very quickly, the two of them attacked at the same time. Xiao Chen was surrounded by sword aura, and in an instant, the vines that were strangling his neck were cut apart. As for Tianyu, her body was enveloped in a white glow. Under the glow, the vines seemed to have dissolved and disappeared without a trace. It didn't take much effort for the two of them to break free from the vines. However, this was clearly just the beginning. Just as the two of them broke free, even more vines attacked them from all directions. These vines seemed to have a life of their own as they attacked them from all directions. Upon seeing this, Xiao Xing's dustless sword instantly appeared in his hand. With the dustless sword in hand, he slashed out fiercely and displayed the square sky sword shadow. In an instant, the sky was filled with sword shadows. The surrounding vines, trees, and weeds were all raised to the ground by the countless sword aura. The dense forest that blocked their line of sight was sliced apart by Xiao Chen's sword. At the same time, the instigator of all this finally appeared before Xiao Chen and Tianyu. Without the obstruction of the dense forest, Xiao Chen and Yi Zichen were able to see more than 10 black trees more than 10 meters tall surrounding the two of them at some point in time. Not only could these black trees move, but their branches were also the black vines that trapped them earlier. At this moment, they were constantly swaying, trying to attack them. Looking at these black trees, Xiao Chen frowned slightly because he recognized the identity of these black trees. Ever since he knew about the vastness of the North Star Realm, Xiao Chen had read a lot of strange books. These books had nothing to do with cultivation. Instead, they introduced the various interesting stories of the North Star Realm, as well as the human geography. The main reason he read these books was to increase his knowledge. He didn't expect that it would really come in handy today. Xiao Chen had once seen an introduction about these black trees in a book. He frowned slightly and spoke as if he was talking to himself. Ancient Ghost Withered Vine. These black trees were the Ancient Ghost Withered Vine. It was said that the Ancient Ghost Withered Vine was a ferocious creature in the North Star Realm during the ancient times. Although it was a plant, the Ancient Ghost Withered Vine could move. Moreover, its spiritual intelligence was low and its actions were driven by instinct. It was said that the Ancient Ghost Withered Vine had a huge appetite and was never picky about food. Regardless of whether it was the human race, the heavenly race, or the beast race, as long as it was meat, the Ancient Ghost Withered Vine would eat it. It was due to this reason that in the ancient times, as long as there were Ancient Ghost Withered Vines, there would definitely be no other living creatures. This was because with the Ancient Ghost Withered Vine's training, it would quickly devour all living creatures in the surroundings, leaving nothing behind. Xiao Chen recognized the Ancient Ghost Withered Vine. On the other side, Tianyu naturally also recognized the Ancient Ghost Withered Vine. At this moment, she exclaimed in surprise. Weren't the Ancient Ghost Withered Vines extinct a long time ago? How could it be? Seeking collection, monthly votes, recommendation. End of chapter. Chapter 1084. The Ancient Ghost Withered Vines that were supposed to be extinct had actually appeared before Xiao Chen and Tianyu. Facing more than 10 Ancient Ghost Withered Vines, Xiao Chen smiled bitterly. Above heavens is indeed a land of death. The first heaven is already so difficult. Above heavens had a total of 9 heavens. At this moment, Xiao Chen and Tianyu were only at the first heaven. Facing more than 10 Ancient Ghost Withered Vines, their expressions became extremely solemn. The most infuriating thing about the Ancient Ghost Withered Vines was their vitality. In terms of attack power, the Ancient Ghost Withered Vines might be ordinary. However, in terms of vitality, these Ancient Ghost Withered Vines were extremely terrifying. At this moment, Xiao Chen and Tianyu were facing 15 Ancient Ghost Withered Vines. The situation was indeed not good. After glancing at the Ancient Ghost Withered Vines with a solemn expression, Xiao Chen quickly regained his composure and said to Tianyu, "We can only think of a way to quickly eliminate these guys. If we fight a protracted battle, the two of us will be exhausted sooner or later. ending the battle quickly was the best method. Regardless of the race, it was impossible to win against the ancient ghost withered vines. This was because the ancient ghost withered vines did not rely on spiritual energy during battle. As such, there would be no exhaustion. On the other hand, regardless of the race, the warriors of the other races would need to rely on spiritual energy during battle. As such, there would naturally be a time when they would be exhausted. They could only strike like lightning and quickly kill these ancient ghost withered vines. Without waiting for Tianyu's reply, Xiaochen continued to speak. "Let's do it. Don't hold back." He reminded Tianyu that this was not the time to hold back. Hearing this, Tianyu nodded silently. She naturally understood this principle. Facing 15 ancient ghost withered vines, she would be a fool if she still wanted to hold back her strength. After speaking, the two of them launched their attacks at the same time. They headed towards different directions and each targeted an ancient ghost withered vine. Holding the dustless sword, Xiaochen fiercely slashed out with the sacred class martial skill, 9 Sifting Sword Qi. The ancient ghost vine used a sacred tier martial skill as soon as it attacked. However, in the face of Xiaochen's 9 Sifting Sword Qi, the ancient ghost vine was smart. It used its branches to form several defensive lines to defend against Xiaochen's 9 Sifting Sword Qi. Jianfeng fiercely landed on the branch. Although the ancient ghost vine's branch was tough, it was still cut off by a sacred level martial skill. However, there were too many branches. After layers of interception, the power of the 9 Siv Sword Qi was already less than 10%. In the end, when it was still a few meters away from the main trunk, it directly dissipated. The 9 Sifting Sword Qi did not manage to severely injure the ancient ghost withered vine, but it did manage to break through its defenses. However, as soon as the 9 Sifting Sword Qi dissipated, the branches that had been severed by the 9 Sifting Sword Qi started to regenerate rapidly. This was the terrifying aspect of the ancient ghost withered vine. As long as one did not deal a fatal blow to it, it would quickly recover with its terrifying vitality. Seeing that the branches were regenerating at an extremely fast speed, Xiaochen did not hesitate. He directly pointed his finger and used another sacred tier martial skill, the Fish Intestine Sword Finger. Currently, Xiaochen had mastered 2 sacred tier martial skills, the 9 Sifting Sword Qi and the Fish Intestine Sword Finger. In order to quickly kill the ancient ghost vine, Xiaochen did not care about the consumption of spiritual energy. He continuously used the 9 Sifting Sword Qi and the Fish Intestine Sword Finger. As he pointed his finger, a green sword light flashed. As the sword light slashed across, the space was torn apart inch by inch. The ground was also torn apart like a piece of paper. As the 6th finger of the 9 Heaven Sword Finger, the Fish Intestine Sword Finger's power had definitely reached the level of a sacred tier martial skill. At this moment, as the green sword light attacked, the ancient ghost withered vine, which had its defenses broken by the 9 Sifting Sword Qi, was completely unobstructed. The Fish Intestine Sword Finger fiercely hit the ancient ghost withered vine's trunk. After a moment of shaking, the ancient ghost withered vine's trunk was directly penetrated by the Fish Intestine Sword Finger. The damage to the trunk was definitely fatal. Moreover, the sharp sword energy contained in the Fish Intestine Sword Finger had also destroyed the ancient ghost withered vine's vitality from the inside. 2 moves were enough to kill an ancient ghost withered vine. However, it was not easy because just these 2 moves had depleted a quarter of the spiritual energy in Xiaochen's body. Such a terrifying consumption of spiritual energy was only in exchange for killing a mere ancient ghost withered vine. At this moment, there were still more than 10 ancient ghost withered vines in front of Xiaochen and Jian Wushuang. At this rate of consumption, it would be difficult to kill all the ancient ghost withered vines. However, there was no other way. After killing the first ancient ghost withered vine, Xiaochen did not hesitate and directly rushed towards the second ancient ghost withered vine. At the same time, Xiaochen carelessly stuffed a handful of elixirs into his mouth and began to recover his spiritual energy. Although he knew that there would be side effects if he consumed such a large amount of elixirs, Xiaochen could not care less about the side effects. He could only give it his all. At the same time that Xiaochen killed the first ancient ghost withered vine, Tianyu had also killed a group of ancient ghost withered vines. Like Xiaochen, Tianyu had also used a sacred class martial skill. At this moment, the mark on Tianyu's forehead was emitting bursts of white light. That aura was indeed extremely terrifying. However, Xiaochen was not in the mood to pay attention to Tianyu's terrifying combat power. Resolving the crisis in front of him was the most urgent matter. He was not stingy with the consumption of his spiritual energy. As long as he could kill the ancient ghost withered vines as quickly as possible, it would be fine. One by one, the ancient ghost withered vines were quickly killed by Xiaochen and Tianyu. However, in the end, when there were only 3 ancient ghost withered vines left, Xiaochen and Tianyu's spiritual energy had already been depleted. There was no other choice. The consumption of a sacred class martial skill was too great. During this period, Xiaochen had killed 5 ancient ghost withered vines while Tianyu had killed 7. Tianyu, who had unleashed his full power, was indeed stronger than Xiaochen in terms of strength. There was no more spiritual energy in their bodies. Furthermore, there were many injuries on their bodies. After a tough battle, there were only 3 ancient ghost withered vines left. However, Xiaochen and Tianyu were truly exhausted. With a pale face and a forehead full of sweat, Xiaochen said weakly with a bitter smile, "These guys are really troublesome. Don't tell me that even with the 2 of us working together, we still can't pass the first heaven?" Under normal circumstances, Xiaochen would not have cared about these 3 ancient ghost withered vines at all. But now, the 2 of them had already killed 12 ancient ghost withered vines. Facing the remaining 3 ancient ghost withered vines, they really did not have the strength to deal with them. Begging for collection, begging for monthly votes, begging for recommendations. End of chapter. Chapter 1085. They had just entered the above heavens, and the 2 of them were already in a perilous situation. Xiaochen felt extremely bitter in his heart. If he had some time to recover, he was confident that he could kill the last 3 ancient ghost withered vines. Even if it was just an hour, Xiaochen was confident that he could kill the last 3 ancient ghost withered vines. Unfortunately, this was impossible. At this moment, the 3 ancient ghost withered vines attacks had already arrived, attacking Xiaochen and Duanling Tian from all directions. Xiaochen smiled bitterly. However, at this moment, Tianyu, who was also pale, suddenly looked at Xiaochen and revealed a somewhat strange smile. "You have to keep what you see next a secret for me, okay?" Hearing this, Xiaochen was stunned at first. However, before he could say anything, the mark on Tianyu's forehead shone brightly. At the same time, Tianyu's entire body seemed to have turned into a black hole and began to crazily devour the surrounding spiritual energy of heaven and earth. The surrounding heaven and earth spirit chi seemed to have been sucked into Tianyu's body in the most simple and crude way. Following this massive amount of spirit chi entering her body, Tianyu's originally extremely weak aura became even more violent at this moment. It was even more terrifying than when she was at her peak. All these changes happened in the blink of an eye. When Tianyu's aura became violent again, the attacks of the 3 ancient ghost withered vines arrived as expected. However, Tianyu had a faint smile on her face. She waved her hand, and a huge palm fell from the sky and pressed on the ground, enveloping Xiaochen and Duanling Tian. This huge palm of spiritual energy was like a protective shield that protected the 2 of them. Within the huge palm, the attacks of the ancient ghost withered vines could not hurt Xiaochen and Duanling Tian. Xiaochen was taken aback when he saw Tianyu, who seemed to have come back to life all of a sudden. However, he quickly regained his senses. He was somewhat astonished, but also somewhat helpless as he bitterly laughed. Heaven-devouring spiritual body, Tianyu was actually the possessor of the heaven-devouring spiritual body. The heaven-devouring spiritual body was one of the most terrifying physiques in the world. Even compared to Xiaochen's Heaven Path Sword embryo, it was not inferior. The most terrifying part of the heaven-devouring spiritual body was that it could devour spiritual energy for its own use. This ability should not be underestimated. It was absolutely terrifying. However, there was a drawback to the heaven-devouring spiritual body. When the heaven-devouring spiritual body was used, it could devour spiritual energy for its own use. After all, the spiritual energy was not refined by the user. There would be a period of weakness. Even so, the heaven-devouring spiritual body was absolutely terrifying. When the heaven-devouring spiritual body, due to the huge amount of spiritual energy entering the body, one's strength would increase. Tianyu's current state. Tianyu was clearly a lamp without oil. Tianyu's aura. Little brother? Hearing Tianyu's words, Xiaochen was speechless. In terms of age, Tianyu was indeed a few years older than him. But now, she actually called him Xiaochen's little brother. Perhaps because he had relaxed, Xiaochen sat on the ground without any scruples. He said to Tianyu unhappily, okay. I'll keep it a secret. But when did I become your little brother? You are younger than me. Aren't you my little brother? All right, little brother, rest here. I'll be back soon. Tianyu chose to ignore Xiaochen's dissatisfaction and resistance. She said with a smile on her face. After saying that, she walked out of the protection of the giant palm and went straight for the 3 ancient ghost vines. As for whether Tianyu could kill the 3 ancient ghost vines, Xiaochen was not worried at all. With the heaven-devouring spiritual body, Tianyu's strength was now stronger than when she was at her peak. She did not need to worry about killing the 3 ancient ghost vines. After completely relaxing, Xiaochen closed his eyes and sat cross-legged. He did not care about the attacks of the 3 ancient ghost vines. Anyway, with the giant palm of spiritual energy left by Tianyu, these attacks could not hurt him at all. Xiaochen focused on recovering the spiritual energy in his body. In the above heavens, it was very dangerous to not have any spiritual energy. Therefore, Xiaochen had to recover as soon as possible. Moreover, although Tianyu was very strong now, she would also fall into a weakened state. After all, the spiritual energy absorbed by the heaven-devouring spiritual body did not belong to her. Once the heaven-devouring spiritual body stopped operating, the spiritual energy in her body would naturally dissipate into nothingness. No longer caring about Tianyu's battle, Xiaochen focused on recovering the spiritual energy in his body. After about the time it took to drink a cup of tea, Tianyu successfully killed the last 3 ancient ghost vines. When she returned to Xiaochen's side, the giant palm of spiritual energy protecting Xiaochen had disappeared. Tianyu's face had turned pale again, even paler than before. Her aura was also extremely weak. Just as Tianyu sat cross-legged beside Xiaochen, Xiaochen slowly opened his eyes and took out a few elixirs from his storage ring and handed them to Tianyu. Quickly heal your injuries. Feeling Xiaochen's faint concern, Tianyu did not stand on ceremony. She smiled, took the elixirs from Xiaochen, and swallowed them in one gulp. The two of them sat side by side. However, Xiaochen did not dare to be careless at this time. While recovering the spiritual energy in his body, he observed the surroundings. At this time, Tianyu was definitely at her weakest. Therefore, Xiaochen could only take on the responsibility of being vigilant. Time passed by slowly. After 4 hours, Xiaochen opened his eyes first. With the help of the elixirs, Xiaochen's spiritual energy had almost recovered. Sensing Xiaochen's movements, Tianyu, who had not fully recovered, opened her eyes at this time and smiled at Xiaochen. The sap of the ancient ghost vines is good stuff. It is very helpful for forging the body. We are not in a hurry. You should refine the sap. The sap of the ancient ghost vines was very helpful for forging the body. Hearing this, Xiaochen smiled and said, "It seems that our battle was not in vain. Okay, I will leave half of it for you." The two of them fought side by side. Now that they had obtained the spoils of war, Xiaochen naturally would not take it all for himself. However, hearing this, Tianyu shook her head. "I don't want it. I don't even forge the body. What use do I have for it? I will give it all to you. Just treat it as a reward from Big Sister to thank Little Brother for accompanying me to this above heavens." As she spoke, the expression in Tianyu's eyes became very bright. The more she called Xiaochen big sister and little brother, the more Tianyu got used to it. Especially when she saw the black lines on Xiaochen's forehead, Tianyu smiled even more beautifully. Begging for collection, begging for monthly votes, begging for recommendations. End of chapter. Chapter 1086. Xiaochen chose to ignore Tianyu's constant calls of big sister and little brother. Sometimes, this woman was just too lively. Xiaochen didn't linger on this issue. He looked at Tianyu and said, "The ancient withered vine sap is so precious. Are you sure you don't want it?" "I already said that I don't want it." "It's all yours," Tianyu said impatiently. Tianyu gave up on such a precious item just like that. Xiaochen didn't say anything else. Judging from Tianyu's reaction, she really wasn't interested in the ancient withered vine sap. Then, Xiaochen turned around and walked towards the dozen ancient withered vines. When Xiaochen arrived before the ancient withered vines, he used the dustless sword to cut a hole in the middle of the ancient withered vine's trunk. Then, a wisp of thick green liquid flowed out from the trunk. Looking at the ancient withered vine sap, Xiaochen seemed to have guessed why Tianyu didn't want it even if she was beaten to death. TSK. How should he put it? It was indeed a little disgusting. Even a man like him frowned at the sight of it, not to mention a delicate young lady like Tianyu. Furthermore, there was a pungent stench coming from the sap of the ancient withered wood vines. Xiaochen recalled what Tianyu had said earlier. If he wanted to use the sap of the ancient withered wood vines to train his body, he had to spread the sap evenly all over his body. Thinking of this, Xiaochen immediately understood why Tianyu gave up the sap of the ancient withered wood vines without hesitation. Moreover, Tianyu wasn't a physique cultivator and didn't attach much importance to it. Since she didn't attach much importance to it, why would she tolerate such a disgusting thing? Therefore, Tianyu chose to give it up without hesitation. However, to Xiaochen, he could still tolerate the ancient withered vine sap. Besides, it was a great help to his tempered battle body. Naturally, Xiaochen wouldn't hesitate. Xiaochen immediately took off his clothes, leaving his upper body bare. Then, he smeared the tree sap all over his body. As a pungent stench assaulted his nose, Xiaochen suppressed the disgust in his heart and sat down cross-legged. At first, Xiaochen was a little resistant to the stench emitted by the green sap, but soon, he felt as if his skin was being pricked by countless needles. The pain became more and more distinct, and it began to spread from his skin to his body. As the pain intensified, Xiaochen naturally forgot about the pungent stench. He focused all his attention on enduring the pain caused by the tree sap as he sensed the changes in his body. Currently, Xiaochen's tempered battle body was at the second level of the Jade Viscera realm. However, ever since he broke through to the Jade Viscera realm, he had never stopped cultivating his tempered battle body. Unfortunately, his progress was very slow. This was because the cultivation of the 100 refined physique was just too difficult. It wasn't something that could be achieved through hard work alone. It also required the cooperation of many treasures in order to make a breakthrough. Without a suitable treasure, the 100 refined physique naturally wouldn't make any significant progress. However, with the help of the ancient withered vine sap, Xiaochen could clearly feel that his 100 refined physique was constantly improving. This discovery made Xiaochen overjoyed. It seemed that Tianyu wasn't lying. The sap of the ancient withered vine was indeed a treasure for body tempering. The improvement of the 100 refined physique represented the strength of his physical body. Ever since the establishment of the sacred palace, Xiaochen's originally overwhelming physical strength had slowly weakened as his opponents grew stronger. For example, Xiaochen's current opponents, the other first chosens of the North Star boundary, weren't much weaker than Xiaochen in terms of physical strength. At the very least, Emosia of the Night Ghost Pavilion was one such example. His physical strength wasn't inferior to Xiaochen's at all. As such, there was no need to even mention the first chosen of the Liwang sect, Tong Huang. His physical strength was probably much stronger than Xiaochen's. His huge advantage was slowly being eroded. Now, Xiaochen could feel his physical strength increasing. How could Xiaochen not be overjoyed? Xiaochen endured the excruciating pain in his body. Not far away, Tianyu quietly opened her eyes and looked at Xiaochen, who had already smeared the sap of the ancient withered wood vine all over his body. Her face revealed an extremely conflicted expression as she cutely stuck out her tongue and whispered, "I wouldn't smear such a disgusting thing on my body." Humph. With that, Tianyu closed her eyes again and began to recover her spiritual power. Tianyu didn't feel that it was a pity to give all the ancient withered vine sap to Xiaochen. Speaking of which, Tianyu's personality was also the kind of carefree type. Coupled with the fact that her relationship with Xiaochen had deepened over this period of time, Tianyu did not have the slightest bit of reluctance or regret in giving away these ancient withered vine sap. Xiaochen cut open the ancient withered vine one after another and extracted the sap to refine his body. With the help of the ancient withered vine sap, Xiaochen's tempered battle body was also rapidly improving. 2 days later, when Xiaochen finished refining the last ancient withered vine sap, his tempered battle body had already reached the limit of the second layer, the Jade Organ's realm. He wasn't far from breaking through to the third layer. At the same time, with the improvement of the tempered battle body, Xiaochen's physical strength would also be much stronger. He could not help but smile. He got up and threw a punch. A sonic boom was heard. Xiaochen was very satisfied with his current physical strength. The only regret he had was that he was unable to break through to the third level of the celestial plane. However, he couldn't be too greedy. The breakthrough of the tempered battle body was extremely difficult. Being able to make such progress was already an unexpected gain. And just when Xiaochen was secretly rejoicing, Tianyu, who had already recovered and changed into a clean set of clothes, appeared in front of Xiaochen. She pinched her nose cutely and looked at Xiaochen with disgust. "It stinks. Go wash up. I found a stream over there. Hurry up." In 2 days, Tianyu had obviously recovered. Hearing this, Xiaochen also found that his body was indeed stinking at this time. The smell was exactly the same as the sap of the ancient withered vine. It was no wonder that Tianyu had a look of disgust. However, perhaps because he was in a good mood, Xiaochen didn't care about Tianyu's disgust. Instead, he said with a smirk, "Stinky man, stinky man. How can you be called a stinky man if you don't stink? Pervert, hurry up and wash up. After you're done, we should get going." However, in the face of Xiaochen's joke, Tianyu shouted angrily. At the same time, she pushed Xiaochen with her hand, indicating that he should hurry up and wash up. Begging for collection, begging for monthly votes, begging for recommendations. End of chapter. Chapter 1087. Xiaochen was forcefully pushed to the side of the stream by Tianyu. He immediately jumped into the stream and washed off the dirt on his body. After a full 15 minutes, Xiaochen confirmed that there was no smell on his body. He then took out a set of clean clothes and put them on. He then found Tianyu, who had been waiting for him not far away. Seeing that he had changed into a set of clean clothes in front of her, Tianyu moved closer and sniffed around. After confirming that there was no smell, she smiled with satisfaction. "All right, let's go. You are really particular. Isn't it just a little smell? What's the big deal? Moreover, we are not on vacation now. We are wandering between life and death. You still have the mood to worry about these things." Seeing that Tianyu was in a good mood and was leading the way, Xiaochen said snappily. "Humph, I am particular. So what? Moreover, who would like to have a smelly thing by their side all day?" Tianyu was not to be outdone. She replied coquettishly. "Thing?" After hearing Tianyu's reply, Xiaochen powerlessly retorted. "First of all, I am not a thing. Moreover, I am not as exaggerated as you say. What do you mean by smelly?" After experiencing this bitter battle, the relationship between Xiaochen and Tianyu had obviously become much closer. In addition to their previous interactions, the two of them could be considered friends who could talk about anything. Therefore, they did not have any misgivings when talking to each other. They argued back and forth. They did not encounter any danger along the way. Soon, the two of them arrived at the center of the first heaven. There, a simple stone door stood. It was an open space surrounded by a dense forest. There was only one stone door in the entire space. It looked very strange. Xiaochen and Tianyu rushed through the dense forest and arrived in front of the stone door. Tianyu frowned and said, "This should be the entrance to the second heaven." Just as Tianyu's voice fell, Xiaochen said softly, "Look there." As she spoke, Tianyu followed Xiaochen's gaze. Not far from the stone door, there was a skull without flesh. However, the unique mark of the heavenly race could still be clearly seen on its forehead. This was the skull of the heavenly race. It should be the holy sons of the 9 heavens who had entered the above heavens. They had indeed died here. They were probably killed by the ancient withered wood vine. A trace of sadness flashed across Tianyu's eyes. Tianyu walked to the skull and said, "Although I do not know who you are a senior of my 9 heavens. Since we have met, I shall bring you, of course." As she spoke, Tianyu took out a cloth and wrapped the skull. Then, she kept it in her storage ring. Xiaochen put away the skull and pushed the stone door open. He saw a fiery red light flickering within the stone door. He looked at each other and both of them walked into the stone door together. This stone door could be treated as a teleportation array. It was a teleportation array that connected the first and second heavens. Under the red light, Xiaochen and Tianyu quickly arrived at the second heavens. Compared to the first heavens, the second heavens could be said to be clear at a glance. From where Xiaochen and Tianyu stood, they could see that there was a similar stone door not far away. In other words, as long as Xiaochen and Tianyu could reach the stone door, they would be able to enter the third heavens. It seemed simple, but there was no joy on Xiaochen and Tianyu's faces. This was because, between them and the stone door, there was a stream of magma that was constantly emitting hot steam. The entire second heavens was a world of magma. The magma formed a circle around the stone door. In other words, no matter which direction they came from, they would have to pass through the magma to reach the stone door. Xiaochen was naturally not worried about ordinary magma. However, the magma here was obviously very mysterious. At least, Xiaochen could tell from the heat emitted by the magma that if he and Tianyu went in, they would definitely die instantly. Logically speaking, at Xiaochen and Tianyu's level of cultivation, the heat and cold of the outside world would not affect them. However, at this moment, standing in the second heavens, Xiaochen and Tianyu actually felt that the heat was unbearable. Even breathing was a little difficult. One could imagine how strong the heat in the magma was. After observing for a moment, Tianyu looked at Xiaochen, not knowing what to do, and asked, "What should we do? There seems to be no other way except to force our way in. There is also a no-fly restriction here. But if we force our way in, this magma..." Unknowingly, Tianyu had become more and more accustomed to relying on Xiaochen. She did not notice this, and Xiaochen did not notice it either. It was as if it was a habit. Hearing Tianyu's words, Xiaochen said with a serious face, "We can only use talismans. Rely on the power of the talismans to force our way through the magma. Using the talismans to force our way through the magma." At this point, Xiaochen paused, then turned to look at Tianyu with a serious face and said word by word, "Remember, use the talismans to force your way through the magma. The most important thing is that the interval between each talisman must be flawless. If there is even the slightest mistake in the interval between the talismans, your life will be in danger." In the face of the magma, it was naturally impossible to rely on the power of one talisman to force their way through. They could only have a chance to succeed by constantly using up the talismans. However, this was where the danger lay. The interval between each talisman must be controlled well. Otherwise, once the previous talisman disappeared, the consequences would be unimaginable before the next talisman could be used. Hearing Xiaochen's words, Tianyu also knew that this was not a joke. She nodded seriously as well. Then, the two of them took out a total of 40 talismans, 20 for each of them. Moreover, all of them had reached the saint level. Holding the talismans in their hands, they looked at each other and nodded at the same time. Then, they activated the talismans together and stepped into the magma. As soon as they entered the magma, the power of the talismans was rapidly eroded. The saint-level talismans, which were originally said to be powerful, could only last for less than 100 breaths in the magma. Xiaochen had been carefully sensing the consumption of the talisman's power. Just as the protective shield formed by the talismans was about to break, he shouted softly, "Use the second talisman." Hearing this, Tianyu did not dare to hesitate and immediately activated the second talisman. At the same time, Xiaochen also used the second talisman. Begging for collection, begging for monthly votes, begging for recommendations. End of chapter. Chapter 1088. The heat of the magma was something Xiaochen had never seen before. The Saint-grade defensive talisman could only last for less than 100 breaths. One could imagine that if one fell into the magma without a defensive talisman, even a Saint-grade expert wouldn't be able to last long. Most importantly, there was a sky restriction in this world. Cultivators couldn't fly at all. In order to break this restriction, one's cultivation would have to be at the same level as the Heavenly Emperor. At the very least, one had to be at the Great Saint grade. One saint-level talisman after another was consumed at a crazy rate. Xiaochen and Tianyu were both very rich. Otherwise, with so many saint-level talismans, no one would be willing to use them like this. Each one would be a life-saving talisman for an ordinary person, and no one would be willing to use them like this. The magma didn't seem very wide. Xiaochen and Tianyu used a total of 38 saint-grade talismans before they reached the other side. Spitting out a mouthful of turbid air, Xiaochen didn't care about his image and sat on the ground. At the same time, Tianyu did the same. However, Tianyu's movements were bigger. Her whole body leaned on Xiaochen. The two sat together. No, to be precise, it should be Tianyu leaning on Xiaochen. A relaxed smile appeared on their faces at the same time. Tianyu even opened her mouth and teased. "It's really hot. I thought I was going to be cooked." "Don't worry. As the saying goes, good people don't live long, but scourges live for 1,000 years. You won't die so easily." Hearing this, Xiaochen smiled. At first, these words sounded like comforting. However, after thinking about it carefully, Tianyu was like an angry little lion. She bared her fangs and brandished her claws at Xiaochen and said fiercely, "Who are you calling a scourge?" After successfully passing through the magma, both of them felt like they had survived a disaster. They relaxed and started to play around. There was no one around. If there were disciples of 9 heavens present at this time, their jaws would definitely drop because although Tianyu was lively and active, she had never played around with anyone like this before. Not to mention, it was an outsider. Moreover, it was a man. Tianyu didn't realize that the longer she stayed with Xiaochen, the more unscrupulous she became. Sometimes, she even forgot her identity as the first saint of 9 heavens. She only felt comfortable with Xiaochen. The two of them played around and came to the stone door of the second heaven. Xiaochen pushed the stone door open with ease and the two of them stepped in. When Xiaochen and Tianyu appeared, they were surrounded by wind and snow. The snow was so strong that their vision. This wind and snow was like the magma of the second heaven. Because. How many years had it been since they had felt this? It was a strange yet familiar feeling. Xiaochen shivered and grumbled in annoyance. "Is there something wrong with your old master Tianhuang's brain? It's either fire or snow. One moment it's cold and the next it's hot. Is he trying to play us to death?" The second heaven was a world of magma. The third heaven was a world of snow. One hot and one cold. Xiaochen felt like he was about to break down. Facing Xiaochen's grumbling, Tianyu replied while shivering, "What nonsense are you talking about? This is a test given to us by the old master. Stop grumbling. Let's hurry up and find the stone door. Searching in this world of snow and wind, the two of them were so cold that their lips were turning blue. They relied on pills to persevere. They tried using talismans. But they couldn't withstand the corrosion of the cold wind. They could only maintain their consciousness and recover their stamina through continuous consumption of pills. Unknowingly, Xiaochen and Tianyu were snuggled up together. Tianyu was even curled up in Xiaochen's embrace. Their posture was very ambiguous. But at this moment, the two of them didn't care about it. At least they could keep warm by huddling together. Hugging Tianyu with both hands, the two of them walked step by step. After 4 days, a stone door that was already frozen appeared in front of the two of them. Looking at the stone door, Tianyu jumped up in joy and pulled Xiaochen's hand. Found it. Found it. Haha. We finally found it. These few days, the two of them were indeed unbearably cold. Now that they finally found the stone door, they were naturally excited. But after the excitement, Tianyu also realized that she had been holding Xiaochen's hand all this time. Her face turned red. Then, like a frightened rabbit, she quickly let go. At the same time, she retreated quickly. Looking at Tianyu's shy appearance, Xiaochen was secretly amused. He had never seen Tianyu like this before. But in order to avoid embarrassment, Xiaochen didn't say anything. Xiaochen smiled and changed the topic. Okay, let's leave this damn place. It's so cold. Perhaps because of her shyness, Tianyu didn't say anything after that. She didn't dare to get close to Xiaochen again. She just followed behind Xiaochen. The two of them came to the stone door together. Xiaochen pushed the stone door open. Without any hesitation, the two of them directly stepped through the stone door. Although he didn't know what dangers were in the fourth heaven, in Xiaochen's opinion, it was better than being frozen in the third heaven. The feeling of shivering in the cold wasn't a good feeling. They came all the way to the fourth heaven. Finally, it was no longer a world of ice and fire. It looked normal. It was a barren plain. Not even a blade of grass grew. Moreover, the stone door to the fifth heaven appeared in front of the two of them. There didn't seem to be any danger. There weren't any obstacles in front of them. It seemed that as long as they walked through the stone door, they would directly enter the fifth heaven. But just when the two of them were thinking about this, a loud roar sounded. Then, a huge monster drilled out from the ground. It was 1,000 feet tall. It looked like a mountain. Its pitch-black skin was like steel. It was a cold python. Its shape was like a whale. But, its fins had turned into sharp claws. As it crawled on the ground, a terrifying pressure spread out. Judging from this pressure, this giant beast had obviously reached the Saint Realm. Facing this huge monster that suddenly appeared, Tianyu cried out in alarm. This is the ancient ferocious black whale, ancient ferocious beast. After hearing this, Xiaochen was speechless. Xiaochen didn't have the slightest idea of killing a Saint Realm ancient ferocious beast. Because it was simply impossible. Even though Xiaochen and Tianyu were both the first saints, the possibility of killing a Saint Realm ancient ferocious beast was too low. Moreover, judging from the aura of this black whale, it was obvious that it hadn't just entered the Saint Realm. Instead, it had been immersed in the Saint Realm for many years. Its aura was vigorous and rich. It didn't seem like it had just broken through. Begging for collection, begging for monthly votes, begging for recommendation. End of chapter. Chapter 1089. A black whale was an ancient ominous beast that had already broken through the sage realm. It wasn't something that Xiaochen and Tianyu could contend against. Both of them were the first holy sons of the northern star boundary. However, they still didn't have a chance of winning. Tianyu was shocked by this black whale. However, Xiaochen had seen some clues. So, he asked, is this black whale a slave beast? A slave beast was a demon beast that had been deprived of its intelligence. This black whale was like this. It was huge and terrifying. However, its pair of moon-like eyes seemed empty and lifeless. Moreover, this black whale couldn't transform into a human form after reaching the sage realm. Moreover, it couldn't speak human language. There was only one explanation for this. It had been deprived of its intelligence, and had become a slave beast. Xiaochen suddenly had a plan in his mind. It was very dangerous. However, it was much better than fighting this black whale to the death. Xiaochen whispered in Tianyu's ear. Tianyu's complexion changed when she heard Xiaochen's plan. Then, she repeatedly shook her head and said, "No, it's too dangerous. This black whale is very powerful. Even a sage expert of the sage great perfection realm wouldn't be able to defeat it. How can you stall it alone?" Xiaochen's plan was very simple. He would stall this black whale. Tianyu would find an opportunity to open the stone door. Then, both of them would go directly to the 6th layer of heaven. It seemed like a good plan. However, Tianyu firmly disagreed with it. Both of them couldn't compete with this black whale even if they joined forces. Not to mention that Xiaochen was alone. It was too dangerous. Tianyu disagreed. Xiaochen wasn't in the mood to comfort her at this time. He couldn't care too much. Xiaochen suddenly shouted angrily. "You have to do it even if you can't. This is the best way. It's settled. I will stall it. You open the stone door as soon as possible." This was the first time Xiaochen had yelled at Tianyu in such a manner. As the number 1 holy maiden of the 9 heavens, it was also the first time Tianyu had been yelled at in such a manner. However, at that moment, Tianyu had apparently forgotten to be angry. She was stunned by Xiaochen's angry roar. It was at that moment that Xiaochen stepped forward with the dustless sword in his hand and spoke to He Jing, who was still yelling at him. "Open the stone door as soon as possible. I can't escape from him for long." Without waiting for Tianyu to reply, Xiaochen moved and took the initiative to attack the black whale. Seeing Xiaochen's action, Tianyu suddenly raised her head. Her eyes were slightly red and there were still traces of tears at the corners of her eyes. She didn't agree with Xiaochen's plan, but there was nothing she could do now. Xiaochen had already rushed towards the black whale, so all she could do was open the stone door as soon as possible. "You are obviously not as strong as me. Why are you showing off? How dare you yell at me?" "Humph." Looking at Xiaochen's back, Tianyu snorted in grievance. She didn't dare to delay any longer. She went around the black whale and rushed towards the stone door. Xiaochen and Tianyu went forward side by side. At the same time, Xiaochen had already soared into the sky and slashed out fiercely with the Jiuluo sword Qi. Xiaochen went all out from the start. Facing the ancient ferocious black whale, it was impossible for him to hold back. However, just as Xiaochen made his move, the black whale flew into a rage. It turned its head and let out a deafening roar at Xiaochen. The terrifying aura shattered the Jiuluo sword Qi. With just a roar, it shattered Xiaochen's sacred-level martial skill, the Jiuluo sword Qi. This was the power of the ancient ferocious black whale. At the same time, the black whale stared at Xiaochen with its big moon-like eyes. Its eyes were full of murderous intent and anger. Perhaps in the eyes of the black whale, Xiaochen was just an ant that it could trample to death at any time. However, such an ant actually dared to take the initiative to attack it. He was simply courting death. Although the black whale didn't have any spiritual intelligence, it still felt that its dignity was being challenged by an ant. This had nothing to do with spiritual intelligence. It was completely instinctive. Furious, the black whale's huge claw that covered the sky slammed down fiercely. The sky seemed to be covered in an instant. Seeing this, Xiaochen didn't dare to hesitate. He immediately performed the stampede of the tiger and narrowly avoided the attack of the black whale. The huge claw landed on the ground. Smoke and dust rose and the ground shook. This caused Tianyu, who was rushing towards the stone door, to stagger and almost fall to the ground. At this time, Xiaochen was complaining in his heart. At most, he would have 30 breaths. This was Xiaochen's estimation. Facing the ancient ferocious black whale, he could only delay it for 30 breaths. If Tianyu couldn't reach the stone door and open it within 30 breaths, the situation would become very dangerous. No one knew what Xiaochen was thinking. The black whale didn't succeed in its attack. Once again, it let out a long roar and attacked Xiaochen. On the other hand, Xiaochen naturally didn't dare to take the attack of the black whale head-on. He could only control it by dodging and attacking from time to time to distract the black whale. He kept dodging, but even so, it was still very dangerous. Just as Xiaochen and the black whale were entangled, 20 breaths passed in the blink of an eye. At this time, Tianyu finally arrived at the stone door. Without any hesitation, she pushed the stone door open. She then turned to Xiaochen and shouted, "The stone door is open. Quick!" Hearing Tianyu's roar, Xiaochen's eyes flashed with joy. Without any hesitation, he slashed out with his sword. The sword tip slashed towards the black whale. Xiaochen then turned around and flew towards the stone door. Xiaochen's attack naturally didn't cause any damage to the black whale. Just as Xiaochen rushed towards the stone door, the black whale turned around and slammed its claw down. Seeing that the giant claw was getting closer and closer, Xiaochen had already increased his speed to the maximum. Tianyu, who was waiting at the stone door, shouted anxiously, "Be careful." In the end, he still couldn't escape the attack of the black whale. The giant claw slammed onto Xiaochen's back. In an instant, Xiaochen's entire back was badly mutilated. However, because of the strength of the claw, Xiaochen was accidentally slammed into the stone door. He spat out a mouthful of blood and his body shot towards the stone door like a cannonball. In the end, Xiaochen hugged Tianyu, who was waiting in front of the stone door, and the two of them rushed into the stone door together. Although it was said that they rushed into the stone door, it was more accurate to say that they crawled in after being slapped by the black whale. Because of such a coincidence, Xiaochen and Tianyu's lives were saved. However, Xiaochen's current situation wasn't too good. After being hit by the claw, Xiaochen was definitely seriously injured. On the other hand, when the black whale saw that the two ants had escaped from under its nose, it roared angrily. In such a roar, the heavens and earth seemed to have lost their color. However, no matter how it roared, Xiaochen and Tianyu still managed to escape. Please add it to your collection, monthly vote, recommend it. End of chapter. Chapter 1090. The black whale roared angrily, but Xiaochen and Tianyu could no longer hear it. At the same time, the stone door slowly closed. After a long while, the black whale vented its anger and sank into the ground again. The whole world became silent again. After successfully escaping from death and entering the fifth heaven, Xiaochen's injuries were very serious. After taking a direct hit from the black whale, it was fortunate that Xiaochen's physical strength was strong. If it was someone else, they would have died on the spot. If that blow had hit Tianyu, she would not have just been seriously injured. If she had not died, she would have been crippled. After all, although Tianyu was strong, in terms of defense and physical strength, she was far inferior to Xiaochen. Tianyu did not care about the propriety between men and women. She hugged Xiaochen and let his head rest on her legs. She called out with a worried face. "Xiaochen, hey, wake up." Xiaochen's eyes were slightly closed. Tianyu was so anxious that she kept shaking Xiaochen's body, trying to wake him up. Amidst Tianyu's sobbing shouts and continuous shaking, Xiaochen finally opened his eyes slowly. A forced smile appeared on his face as he spoke. "Hey, stop shaking me. If you continue to shake me, I will really faint." In the face of Tianyu's worry and anxious appearance, Xiaochen was touched. Hence, he made a rare joke to tease Tianyu. However, in the face of Xiaochen's joke, Tianyu rolled her eyes and said snappily, "You still have the mood to joke at a time like this?" As she spoke, Tianyu took out an elixir from her storage ring and personally fed it to Xiaochen. As soon as the elixir entered Xiaochen's stomach, a pure medicinal power spread throughout his body. The elixir that Tianyu took out was not an ordinary elixir. It was a healing elixir that had reached the saint level and was very valuable. With the help of this pill, Xiao Chen's complexion gradually relaxed, and a trace of color slowly returned to his face. He did not recklessly attempt the fifth heaven. Xiao Chen's current condition was not good and he was seriously injured. Under such circumstances, it would be extremely irrational to act rashly. After finding a relatively safe place, Xiao Chen began to heal himself while Tianyue stayed close to him to protect and take care of Xiao Chen. Perhaps even Tianyue herself had never thought that one day, she would take care of a person like this. Moreover, it was a man. Tianyue's attentiveness was like that of a virtuous wife. Xiao Chen was also happy to enjoy this. Thinking about it, in the entire Northern Star Realm, other than himself, who else could make the first saintess of the 9 heavens, Tianyue, take care of him so gently? Moreover, she never left his side. Under Tianyue's careful care, Xiao Chen's body rapidly recovered. At the same time, in the sacred palace of the distant heavenly Chen continent, the 9 heavens saint, the 2 saints sent by the 9 heavens saint, and Saint Ziyu finally arrived. The 3 of them represented the 9 heavens saint to confirm the alliance. Of course, the specific negotiations would definitely require the quasi-saints from both sides to meet in person. However, now was not the time because Chen Ling and Wang Qing had not sent back any news. They could only wait for the Supreme God sect and Li Wang's sect to make a decision before the quasi-saints from both sides could meet. Therefore, Xiao Sheng and the others did not show up when Ziyu and the others arrived. They only let the 9 heavens saint and the others be in charge of receiving them and serving them with good food and drinks while waiting for news from the Supreme God sect and Li Wang's sect. They did not place much importance on them, but they did not look down on them either. However, with the return of the 9 heavens saint and the others, Qin Shuru and the others learned that Xiao Chen had entered the above heavens saint. At this moment, the 9 heavens saint personally came to Xiao Chen's cave residence and told the 3 women the truth about the 9 heavens palace. Hearing this, the 3 women's expressions changed slightly. Qin Shuru said coldly, "Why didn't you stop him? Don't you know how dangerous the above heaven saint is?" Perhaps because of the worry in his heart, Qin Shuru's attitude became somewhat cold. Fortunately, the 9 heavens saint did not care about this and only shook his head with a bitter smile. "Don't you know Qin'er's personality? Who can persuade him when he has decided on something?" The 9 heavens saint's words were not false. Hearing this, 100 Flower Fairy comforted, "Shuru, you can't blame the saint for this. It's not like you don't know our husband's temper." But that day in the heavens," Qin Shuiro said worriedly. But that day in the heavens, the above heavens saint was too dangerous. Moreover, Xiao Chen did not say anything and directly entered the above heavens saint. How could Qin Shuru and the others not be worried? However, Xiao Chen had already entered the above heavens saint. Even if the 3 women were worried, there was nothing they could do. The only thing they could do was pray that Xiao Chen would return safely. They did not tell Bai Ruyue and Xiao Qing about this matter. The 3 women were afraid that the 2 elders would be worried, so they chose to hide it. Unaware that the 3 women were currently worried about him, Xiao Chen recuperated in the above heavens saint for a few days. His injuries were completely healed, and the 2 of them continued to advance. They had already arrived at the 5th layer of heaven. With the cooperation of Xiao Chen and Tianyue, the 2 of them were able to break through like a hot knife through butter. Half a month later, the 2 of them finally arrived at the stone gate of the 8th layer of heaven. As long as they passed this gate, they would be able to enter the 9th layer of heaven. This was the final test of the above heavens saint. Just one more step. Looking at the stone gate of the 8th layer of heaven, Xiao Chen said softly, "Yes, just one more step." Tianyue smiled and nodded in agreement. Then, Xiao Chen pushed open the stone gate, and the 2 of them strode in. Xiao Chen had no idea what the test of the 9th layer of heaven was. After a moment of dizziness, Xiao Chen arrived at the final 9th layer of heaven. However, what surprised him was that the 9th layer of heaven was actually a city. That's right, it was a city. And Xiao Chen was currently in this city. There were people coming and going, and the cries of various vendors gave off an extremely lively and prosperous feeling. This is. After looking around, Xiaochen discovered that this city was no different from an ordinary city. Moreover, there were people of various races in the city. Could it be that there are still people living in the above heaven saint? If this city was real, it meant that the people in the city had been living in the above heaven saint for a long time. At the very least, they had existed since ancient times. He didn't expect that the 9th layer of heaven would actually be like this. After some doubts, Xiaochen quickly discovered that something was amiss. And this was because of his own condition. My cultivation has disappeared. Inadvertently, Xiaochen discovered that his cultivation had actually disappeared completely. There wasn't even a trace of spiritual energy in his body. Seeking collection, seeking monthly votes, seeking recommendation. End of chapter. Chapter 1091. Xiaochen could not feel any trace of spiritual energy. At this moment, he had become an ordinary person. Furthermore, Tianyu was nowhere to be found. Xiaochen stood alone on the street as people came and went on both sides of him. He did not know what the test of the 9th heaven was. However, just as Xiaochen was in a daze, an extremely untimely sneer suddenly sounded from behind him. "Oh? You must be new. Do you know the rules of 9 Heaven City?" Upon hearing the voice, Xiaochen turned around and saw 5 burly and ferocious-looking men looking at him with sneers on their faces. These 5 people were ordinary people without any cultivation. If it were any other time, Xiaochen could easily crush them with a finger. However, it was a pity that Xiaochen had become an ordinary person without any cultivation. Ordinary people against ordinary people, and the other party had 5 burly men. Xiaochen obviously did not have any advantage. However, Xiaochen did not panic. He remembered that when he was young, Xiaochen was only a child with the height of a dog and did not have any cultivation. However, Xiaochen had never been afraid of anyone in Lingshan City. He was even more familiar with leading the Xiao family disciples to fight. To put it bluntly, although Xiaochen was a disciple of a large family, his father, Xiaochen, could be said to have been raised freely by his father, Xiaoqing. Because of this, Xiaochen had experienced many things and suffered a lot. It was as if he had returned to the time when he was young and fighting in Lingshan City. Xiaochen could vaguely guess the test of the 9th heaven. The mundane world of the marketplace. Xiaochen murmured softly with an evil smile on his face. Then, he looked at the 5 burly men and said with a smile. "You're new. So what?" Having already guessed the test of the 9th layer of heaven, Xiaochen felt a little excited. Having been in the world of warriors for so long, it was a different feeling to suddenly return to the mundane world of the common people. Seeing that Xiaochen was not afraid at all, the leader of the 5 men laughed coldly. "Oh, you're arrogant. Do you know the rules of 9 Heaven City? Newcomers have to follow us to the City Lord Mansion and be a slave for a year. Only then will you have the right to live in 9 Heaven City. Be a slave for a year in the City Lord Mansion?" Hearing this, Xiaochen smiled and shook his head. "I don't have the habit of working hard. Are you kidding me? Be a slave? Unless the sun rises from the west." Seeing that Xiaochen chose to reject without hesitation, a cold light flashed in the leader's eyes. He said fiercely, "We gave you face, but you don't want it. Brothers, let's teach this kid the rules of 9 Heaven City." Following the leader's words, the 4 men behind him sneered and walked towards Xiaochen. Seeing this, Xiaochen did not wait for his death. Instead, he chose to strike first to gain the upper hand. Although he had lost his cultivation, Xiaochen was no stranger to fighting. He was not called the little tyrant of Lingshan City for nothing. Xiaochen was well aware of what he needed to pay attention to in a street brawl between mortals. Therefore, he ignored the 4 people who were approaching him and locked his gaze on the leader of the group. To shoot a man, shoot the horse first. To capture the bandits, capture the leader first. When fighting in the marketplace, when the enemy was strong and you were weak, you shouldn't think about fighting a group of people alone because it was simply unrealistic. The best way was to focus on the leader and beat him up. As long as the leader was beaten down, the rest of the matter would be relatively simple. With a kick, the person closest to Xiaochen was caught off guard. Xiaochen viciously kicked him on the leg. The intense pain caused the person to grit his teeth and cry out, "Ouch!" F***ck. After succeeding in his attack, Xiaochen did not stop. Taking advantage of the fact that the other three were extremely stunned, he rushed towards the leader. Seeing that Xiaochen actually dared to take the initiative to rush towards him, the leader shouted angrily, "Kid, you're really courting death." As he spoke, he raised his fist and met Xiaochen's attack. However, Xiaochen's fighting experience was obviously not comparable to these people. He skillfully dodged the man's fist and then threw out a punch, hitting the leader's abdomen. After spitting out a mouthful of blood, Xiaochen kicked the man's right knee. Under the pain, the man directly knelt on the ground on one knee. After all, the two consecutive attacks were swift and extremely ruthless. However, this was not the end. Taking advantage of the situation, Xiaochen circled behind the leader and tightly strangled his neck with both hands. He tried his best to suppress him and prevent him from standing up. With his neck tightly strangled, breathing became extremely difficult. Soon, the leader's face turned red. Everything happened in the blink of an eye. Just after the leader was restrained by Xiaochen, the other four people came back to their senses. Seeing that their eyes were fixed on him again, Xiaochen said with a sinister smile on his face, "Don't move, or I'll break his neck." "How dare you?" Hearing Xiaochen's words, the four people shouted angrily. "You'll know if I dare or not after you try." Hearing this, Xiaochen was unmoved and smiled. At the same time, he increased the strength of his hand. At this time, he had already captured the leader. Now that he had the initiative, there was no reason for him not to dare. He didn't expect things to develop into this situation. Since the leader was captured, the remaining four people naturally didn't dare to act rashly. Seeing that the four people didn't dare to make any more moves, Xiaochen smiled coldly. To catch bandits, first catch the leader. This was indeed an immutable truth. Whether it was in the world of warriors or in the marketplace, it was extremely useful. Seeing that the four people didn't dare to make any moves, Xiaochen dodged a dagger from one of them and used the dagger to restrain the leader. Then, he began to interrogate him. It was indeed a strange scene for one person to interrogate 5 burly men. However, Xiaochen didn't care about this. Xiaochen felt that this Nine Heavens city was a little strange. The people here were ordinary people without any cultivation. It was as though they couldn't cultivate in this place. Due to the previous fight, the surroundings were filled with people. Under the watchful eyes of the crowd, Xiaochen couldn't say anything. Soon, he got the few people to bring him to a quiet place. With the leader firmly under his control, Xiaochen was led to an alley by the other four. There were no outsiders there, so Xiaochen completely let go of his guard and asked the four in a deep voice, "Are all of you born and raised in Nine Heavens City since young?" "Yes." Facing Xiaochen's question, the four people nodded and replied without hesitation. "Are there many newcomers in Nine Heavens City?" Xiaochen continued to ask. "Begging for collection, begging for monthly votes, begging for recommendations." End of chapter. Chapter 1092. Previously, Xiaochen had heard from these people that the newcomers were going to be slaves in the city lord's mansion for a year. Therefore, he was very curious about this. Furthermore, Xiaochen also wanted to find out the secret of the ninth heaven through these people. His cultivation base had mysteriously disappeared and then reappeared in this Nine Heavens City. He was still unsure of what the test in Nine Heavens City was and how he could pass it. Therefore, Xiaochen was in urgent need of useful information. Under Xiaochen's interrogation, these people spilled everything they knew to Xiaochen. Needless to say, Xiaochen really did obtain some useful information from these people. According to these people, the so-called newcomers were told to them by the city lord's mansion. They could be considered as the guards of Nine Heaven City. Today, the steward of the city lord's mansion told them where a newcomer had entered Nine Heaven City. This newcomer was Xiao Chen and asked the 5 of them to bring Xiao Chen back. In other words, these 5 people actually didn't know how Xiao Chen had entered, but the city lord's mansion knew. He had just entered Nine Heaven City and the city lord's mansion already knew. It seemed like there was a secret in the city lord's mansion. Or rather, the city lord's mansion should be related to the test of the 9th heaven. It might even be related to the final emperor's record. In order to understand the situation, he had to make a trip to the city lord's mansion. Fortunately, although he didn't have any cultivation, the people in Nine Heaven City were all ordinary people. There wasn't a single cultivator. Since they were all ordinary people without cultivation, the pressure in Xiao Chen's heart lessened. However, if he wanted to go to the city lord's mansion, he had to plan carefully. After all, he didn't have the strength to fight against 10 people. Xiao Chen asked some more questions about the city lord's mansion. However, these people didn't know much about the city lord's mansion. What surprised Xiao Chen was that the leader actually had a map of the city lord's mansion. This was definitely good news for Xiao Chen. With the map, it would be more convenient and safer to move around. Without any hesitation, Xiao Chen kept the map. Finally, he asked a few people about Tianyu. Since the city lord knew about his arrival, they would definitely know about Tianyu's arrival. Moreover, based on the current situation, Tianyu should be in the same situation as him. Her cultivation should have disappeared. Thinking of this, Xiao Chen couldn't help but worry. Normally, Xiao Chen would not be worried. But now, it was different. Without cultivation, Tianyu was just an ordinary woman. In addition, Xiao Chen knew very well that Tianyu had never experienced any setbacks since she was a child. She didn't want herself to be a wily old fox who had mingled in the streets since she was a child. Without her cultivation, Tianyu was just an inexperienced little girl in the mortal world. He was very clear that Tianyu did not have the ability to mingle in the marketplace at all. Therefore, Xiao Chen's most important goal now was not to go to the city lord's mansion, but to find Tianyu. He did not want anything to happen to Tianyu. However, Xiao Chen did not manage to find out any information about Tianyu from the 5 people. The 5 of them only knew about Xiao Chen's existence and did not know about Tianyu's existence. Feeling rather exasperated, Xiao Chen knocked all 5 of them out and left on his own. It was not time to go to the city lord's mansion yet. Let's find Tianyu first. However, in this vast sea of people and he was not familiar with the Nine Heavens City, where could he find her? As he walked, he thought to himself. After a while, Xiao Chen had a flash of inspiration. He slapped his forehead and said excitedly, "How stupid! Didn't the 5 of them say that they would capture all the newcomers and bring them to the city lord's mansion? If Tianyu is captured, she will definitely be brought to the city lord's mansion. I only need to go to the city lord's mansion and I will be able to find her." He would definitely be able to find Tianyu if he went to the city lord's mansion. This was much better than wandering around the city. Thinking of this, Xiao Chen turned around and went straight to the city lord's mansion. As the manager of the Nine Heavens City, it was not difficult to find the city lord's mansion. When Xiao Chen went straight to the city lord's mansion, Tianyu had already been captured and brought to the city lord's mansion. In the main hall, Tianyu fell to the ground with a horrified expression. In front of her, a middle-aged man and a young man were sitting in the middle. The middle-aged man looked calm. However, the young man had a perverted smile on his face. The way he looked at Tianyu was extremely invasive. It was as though he wanted to see through Tianyu. Beautiful. She is really beautiful. Father, I want this girl. After staring at Tianyu for a while, the young man finally looked at the middle-aged man beside him and said. The middle-aged man was the city lord of the Nine Heavens City and the young man was his only son. Hearing the young man's words, the middle-aged man did not reject. He nodded his head and said, "Since you like them, I will give them to you." "Thank you, father." Hearing this, the young man stood up excitedly and bowed. Hearing the conversation between the father and son, Tianyu was completely stunned. Just as Xiaochen had thought, Tianyu did not have the ability or means to survive in the marketplace. Ever since she was young, Tianyu had either stayed in her family or lived in Nine Heavens. She had never come into contact with the messy, scheming world of the city. Speaking of the mundane world, many people actually misunderstood it. They always thought that the world of cultivators was the most chaotic. Little did they know that compared to the mundane world of the mundane world, the world of cultivators was actually considered a pure land. The world of cultivators was cruel. This was true. However, it was not chaotic. It was not like the marketplace where crooks and honest people were mixed together. In addition to being cruel, it was also extremely chaotic. There were all kinds of tricks that were used. As an ordinary person, if they wanted to live well in the marketplace, it was definitely a great knowledge. They also needed to have sufficient ability to do so. It was a pity that as the number one saintess of the Nine Heavens, Tianyu had never come into contact with these things since young. In the past, he had thought that the mundane world was far away from him and he would probably never cross paths with them. But who would have thought that in this above heavens, Tianyu would actually become a member of the mundane world? Furthermore, her cultivation had mysteriously disappeared, turning her into an ordinary person from head to toe. Looking at the young man walking toward her excitedly, Tianyu instinctively retreated. She couldn't help but think to herself, "Xiaochen, where are you? Where are you?" In the most helpless moment of her life, Tianyu actually thought of Xiaochen. At the same time, the young man came to Tianyu, squatted down, and ran his finger across Tianyu's cheek. He said with a smile, "Beauty, don't be afraid. I am very gentle. Besides, if you follow me, I guarantee that you will get whatever you want in the Nine Heavens city. Begging for collection, begging for monthly votes, begging for recommendations." End of chapter. Chapter 1093. Tianyu felt a wave of disgust when she heard the young man's words. She slapped the young man's arm away and said fiercely, "You are not worthy." Not giving any face at all. Facing Tianyu's chastity, the young man wasn't annoyed. Instead, he laughed coldly and said, "Ha, what a wild horse. Interesting. Men, bring her to my room. I will train her well tonight." "Yes." Hearing the young man's order, the two guards outside the door responded respectfully. They then forcefully brought Tianyu away. Tianyu's heart was in a mess when she was manipulated by a group of ordinary people who had no cultivation and she was powerless to resist. It was like a person who suddenly lost both of her legs. It was the same feeling. If it was any other time, Tianyu could flatten Nine Heavens City with a single slap. However, she did not have the ability to do so now. After Tianyu was beaten away, only the Nine Heavens City governor and his son were left in the hall. The young man looked at his father and the smile on his face quickly disappeared. It was replaced by a solemn expression. "Father, these two are newcomers. Could it be that they are related to the ancestors? It should be so. So be careful. Don't forget the ancestors' advice." Hearing this, the Nine Heavens City governor nodded seriously. The ancestors' advice? If Xiaochen was present and heard what the two said, he would have been shocked. It seemed that the city lord's residence had something to do with the test of the ninth layer of heaven, and the relationship was not small. In other words, the city lord's residence was the key to passing the ninth layer of heaven. However, it was a pity that Xiaochen was not present at the moment. Hence, he had no way of knowing. Time passed slowly and the night gradually fell. There were fewer and fewer people on the street. Everyone had returned to their homes to rest. As ordinary people, they could not be like cultivators who could go without sleep. On the street outside the city governor's mansion, there was no one to be seen. Only a few guards at the door were still standing straight. However, just as the night sky gradually darkened, a black shadow rushed out from the corner of a house not far from the courtyard wall of the city governor's mansion. After which, it agilely stepped on the courtyard wall and directly jumped into the courtyard. This black shadow was none other than Xiaochen. He had been waiting here since the day, waiting for night to fall. Now that it was almost time, Xiaochen naturally began to sneak into the city lord's mansion secretly. After successfully entering the city lord's mansion, Xiaochen hid behind a large tree and observed the situation of the guards in the city lord's mansion. The main purpose of this trip was to rescue Tianyu. As for the secrets of the city lord's mansion, there was no hurry. After rescuing Tianyu, there would be plenty of time to investigate. Xiaochen stood where he was without making a sound, almost blending into the night. After careful observation, Xiaochen found that the security in the city lord's residence was very tight. There were more than 10 teams of guards in charge of patrolling. Each team had 5 people. As a result, Xiaochen's plan to take action was cut off. After all, there were 5 people. Xiaochen was not confident that he could kill them silently. After all, Xiaochen was also an ordinary person without any cultivation. Since he was an ordinary person, he could only think like an ordinary person. If he still regarded himself as a warrior, he would be digging his own grave. He had to face reality. Therefore, Xiaochen did not act rashly. He had been patiently waiting for an opportunity. Teams of patrolling guards walked past Xiaochen, but they did not notice Xiaochen. Just as Xiaochen was secretly anxious, Xiaochen suddenly saw a young man in servant's clothes walking towards him. There was only one person. Seeing this servant, Xiaochen's eyes flashed with joy. He thought to himself, "Here's my chance." He quietly approached the servant. Just as the servant was about to pass by the big tree where Xiaochen was hiding, Xiaochen directly rushed out. Then, before the servant had any time to react, Xiaochen covered his mouth and forcibly dragged him back behind the big tree. He did not expect that a thief would appear in the heavily guarded city lord mansion. Being captured by Xiaochen, the servant's eyes were round and full of horror. "I'm asking you. If you dare to scream, I'll kill you. Do you understand?" Xiaochen stared at the servant and said in a low voice. His voice was full of killing intent. Hearing Xiaochen's words, the servant nodded repeatedly. Then, Xiaochen began to ask questions. It was mainly about Tianyu. Was there a young girl who was captured and brought back to the city lord mansion today? Xiaochen asked. Yes. Hearing this, the servant hesitated for a moment, but still nodded and replied. Sure enough, after hearing the servant's answer, Xiaochen was delighted. Then, he continued to ask, "Where's this woman now?" In the young master's room." The servant replied. "In the young master's room?" Hearing this, the joy that surged in Xiaochen's heart was extinguished quickly and was replaced by a strong killing intent. For some unknown reason, Xiaochen couldn't help but be filled with killing intent when he heard that Tianyu might have been defiled by the so-called young master. After asking for the location of the young master's room, Xiaochen mercilessly broke the servant's neck. Then, he quickly changed into the servant's clothes and swaggered out. Disguised as a servant of the city lord mansion, Xiaochen met several teams of patrolling guards along the way. However, seeing Xiaochen's calm expression and the identity token hanging on his waist, the guards didn't think much of it. Xiaochen quickly rushed to the young master's room. Just as Xiaochen rushed over, Tianyu was holding a pair of scissors and was forced to the corner of the room. In front of Tianyu, the young man in the daytime was forcing her step by step with a lecherous smile and spoke with disdain. "Oh, what's wrong? You want to commit suicide? Kill yourself if you dare. To tell you the truth, this young master has seen plenty of women like you. Each and every one of them pretended to be chaste and virtuous, but in the end, didn't they crawl into bed obediently? So, stop acting in front of this young master. Kill yourself if you dare." Apparently, he didn't believe that Tianyu would really kill herself. As soon as the young man finished his words, a glint of determination flashed in Tianyu's eyes. "Even if I die, I won't let an ant like you defile me. My body will only be..." Tianyu raised the scissors in her hand and stabbed it into her heart without hesitation. Seeing that Tianyu actually dared to commit suicide, the young man's expression changed drastically. At this moment, the door was kicked open with a bang. Then, Xiaochen, who was dressed in servant's clothes, strode in. Seeking collection, seeking monthly votes, seeking recommendation. End of chapter. Chapter 1094. As soon as Xiaochen entered the room, he saw Tianyu preparing to commit suicide. In a moment of desperation, Xiaochen couldn't care less and shouted loudly, "Tianyu!" The familiar voice made Tianyu pause in her actions. She turned her head, and when she saw Xiaochen's familiar face appear in front of her, Tianyu finally couldn't hold on any longer. Tears instantly poured down her face as she cried out, "Xiaochen, save me!" As the first saint of 9 heavens, this was the first time Xiaochen saw Tianyu crying so sadly. Although Tianyu had almost cried because of him, it was only a near cry. Now, however, tears kept falling from her eyes. Xiaochen's heart ached when he saw Tianyu in such a state. However, now wasn't the time to talk about this. Xiaochen immediately turned to look at the young man. At the same time, the young man looked at Xiaochen fiercely and asked, "Are you the other newcomer?" Naturally, the young man did not get a reply, because Xiaochen had already made his move when the young man opened his mouth to speak. He quickly stepped forward and kicked the young man in the groin with all his might. The young man's face instantly turned black and he couldn't help but kneel down. Xiaochen seized the opportunity and tore the tablecloth beside him into pieces. Then, he tied the young man up tightly and stuffed a piece of cloth into the young man's mouth. After doing all this, Xiaochen heaved a sigh of relief and carefully closed the door. Only then did he have the time to look at Tianyu. The young man had been too careless tonight. He thought he could spend the night with Tianyu, so he sent the surrounding guards away. He didn't have the habit of being eavesdropped on by others. Because of the young man's action, the outside world didn't know what was happening in the room at all. Xiaochen easily subdued the young man. Although he didn't have any cultivation, it was easy for him to take down a young man who had been hollowed out by wine and women. After Xiaochen secretly relaxed, Tianyu suddenly threw herself into Xiaochen's arms and said with a sobbing tone, "Xiaochen, I thought I would never see you again. Why are you only here now?" I almost, her words were full of grievance. Xiaochen did not expect that Tianyu, the #1 holy maiden of the 9 heavens, would be in such a state. However, seeing Tianyu crying so sadly, Xiaochen still comforted her. All right. It's fine. I'm here now." After some consolation, Tianyu gradually calmed down. Subsequently, the two of them sat down on a chair. Tianyu's face was still a little pale as she sat beside Xiaochen. However, there was not much panic in her eyes and she had calmed down. Tianyu was also a little curious about the 9th heaven. She looked at Xiaochen and asked, "Xiaochen, what do you think the 9th heaven means? How can we pass it? Besides, we don't have any cultivation anymore." "I think the 9 heavens city itself is a test of the 9th heaven. If we want to pass the 9th heaven, the secret should be in the city lord's mansion." Hearing this, Xiaochen told Tianyu his guess. With Xiaochen beside her, Tianyu quickly relaxed. Perhaps even she didn't notice that she had gotten used to relying on Xiaochen. The two of them chatted for a while. Then, Xiaochen turned his gaze to the young man and said with a cold smile, "This person is the city lord's son?" Hearing Xiaochen's words, Tianyu replied fiercely, "That's right. They are a pair of dogfather and son." After learning the identity of the young man from Tianyu, Xiaochen's smile became even colder. "So you are the city lord's son. If that's the case, you should know a lot of things. For example, the secrets of the 9 heavens city." Hearing this and looking at the cold smile on Xiaochen's face, the young man's heart trembled. He felt as if he was a wolf looking at a sheep. He was the sheep, and Xiaochen was the pack of hungry wolves that were emitting green light from both sides. As if he was scared stiff, the young man didn't respond for a long time. Seeing this, Xiaochen didn't mind and continued, "I have a few questions. Now, I will ask and you will answer. Is that okay? There was still no response. The young man was still in a daze. Seeing this, Xiaochen sighed helplessly. He turned around and snatched the scissors from Tianyu's hand. He got up and slowly walked to the young man and squatted down. I wanted to have a good talk with you. However, it seems like you won't speak unless I use some tricks. Saying this, Xiaochen turned to Tianyu and said, if you feel disgusted, you can turn your head away. After saying this, Xiaochen didn't hesitate anymore. He directly pierced the scissors into the young man's thigh. Blood spurted out instantly. The young man's body couldn't help but tremble from the intense pain. His mouth was gagged and the young man could only make muffled sounds. It was definitely a cruel interrogation. Under Xiaochen's various tricks, the young man was soon left with only one breath. His clothes were already stained red with blood. After spending so much effort, Xiaochen did get what he wanted from the young man. According to the young man, the city lord's mansion had a history of countless years. Ever since the Nine Heavens city appeared, the city lord's mansion had always been occupied by the people of the city lord's mansion. As for how the Nine Heavens city appeared, the young man didn't know. However, he told Xiaochen that there was a mysterious stone hall in the city lord's mansion. This stone hall was deep in the backyard of the city lord's mansion. It was a pity that other than the city lord himself, no one else could enter the stone hall. Moreover, every time a new person appeared in the Nine Heavens city, the city lord would be the first to know from the stone hall. According to the ancestral teachings of the city lord's mansion, once a new person appeared in the Nine Heavens city, they had to capture him at all costs and then imprison him. Although no one knew the meaning of the ancestral teachings, the city lords of the Nine Heavens city carried it out very seriously. It was a pity that no new person had entered the Nine Heavens city for many years. It was only today that Xiaochen and Tianyu appeared. The young man didn't know much about the Nine Heavens city. He only knew about the ancestral teachings and the mysterious stone hall. However, after hearing this, Xiaochen was even more certain that the Nine Heavens city and the city lord's mansion was a test left behind by the so-called emperor. Back then, he must have moved a group of people here and used the power of a great sage to block their path of cultivation. He also set up a seal to seal the cultivation of everyone who entered the Nine Heavens city. After that, he used the city lord's mansion to carry out the test. As for the mysterious stone hall, it might be the location of the heavenly emperor's record. Even if it wasn't, it should be the door to the heavenly emperor's record. Begging for collection, begging for monthly votes, begging for recommendations. Chapter 1095. Mysterious Stone Palace. From the looks of it, he could only think of a way to go to the mysterious stone palace. However, according to the young man, if he wanted to enter the mysterious stone palace, he needed a token. This token was passed down from generation to generation in the city lord mansion. Only the current city lord had it. Only the current city lord had it. In other words, if he wanted to enter the mysterious stone palace, he could only meet the city lord. Lying in a pool of blood, the young man's breath was extremely weak. He had asked all the questions he needed. Xiaochen looked at him and said indifferently, "Let me send you on your way, so that you won't have to suffer anymore." After saying that, Xiaochen pierced the young man's chest with a pair of scissors. After killing the young man without hesitation, Xiaochen sat on the chair again. Tianyu was not dissatisfied with Xiaochen's actions. Although she was inexperienced, she was not a soft-hearted person. Previously, she was only panicking because she suddenly lost her cultivation. Killing people was a common thing for Xiaochen and Tianyu. Therefore, even if they lost their cultivation, killing a few people did not affect them at all. Seeing that Xiaochen was deep in thought, Tianyu said softly, "What do you think the Sky Emperor old ancestor wants to test by setting up the ninth heaven? What is his purpose?" She already knew that the answer was in the mysterious stone palace. However, Tianyu did not understand why the Sky Emperor set up the ninth heaven. Hearing Tianyu's words, Xiaochen said softly, "I think I understand." "You understand? Then tell me quickly." Tianyu asked anxiously. It's simple. The Sky Emperor set up the ninth heaven to tell the future generations that the strong warriors are not only because of their cultivation. Even if they lose their cultivation one day, they should still be strong. Cultivation is the embodiment of a warrior's strength, but it is not the foundation of a warrior's strength. As long as they have the intention, they can recover their lost cultivation one day. This is also why the Sky Emperor set up the nine-heaven city and sealed everyone's cultivation. He also arranged for a city lord mansion. Think about it, if one suddenly loses his cultivation and has to face the pursuit of the city lord mansion, what would happen to a person who is not strong? It's here. Hearing Xiao Chen's words, Tianyu said in a deep voice. Tianyu finally understood after Xiao Chen's explanation. That's right, wasn't it just like her? When she first arrived at the Nine Heavens city, she suddenly lost her cultivation. Tianyu really panicked at that time. Then, she was captured and brought to the city lord mansion without any resistance. Think about it, if Xiao Chen was not here, what would have happened to her? She would definitely be trapped in the Nine Heavens city until her death. There was still some lingering fear in her heart, but she was also glad that Xiao Chen was by her side this time. What do you mean? Tianyu asked doubtfully. Naturally, they were going to take action against the city lord. Now that Xiao Chen had rescued Tianyu, according to Xiao Chen's original plan, they only needed to rescue Tianyu tonight and it would be considered a success. But now, Xiao Chen changed his mind. Since the young man was killed by him, the city lord would definitely find out tomorrow at the latest. In this way, the guards of the city lord mansion would be strengthened greatly. At that time, it would be difficult to sneak into the city lord mansion. Therefore, Xiao Chen decided to take the opportunity to take action tonight. He would find the token to enter the mysterious stone hall in the city lord mansion and pass through the last layer of the sky above heavens. He explained his plan to Tianyu. Tianyu had no objections. Then, the two of them packed up and walked towards the city lord's room. Along the way, they naturally encountered the patrolling guards. As soon as they walked out of the young man's small courtyard, Xiao Chen and Tianyu were stopped. Hey, isn't this the newcomer? Where are you bringing him? The leader of the guards looked at Tianyu suspiciously. Then, he looked at Xiao Chen and questioned him coldly. Xiao Chen had already thought of an excuse. In the face of the guard's question, he respectfully said in his heart, the city lord wants to see this newcomer. I am following his orders. After hearing Xiao Chen's words, the guard's expression eased a little. Since the city lord wanted to see the newcomer, there was naturally no problem. Moreover, Xiao Chen's words were perfect. After all, if Xiao Chen was here to save Tianyu, there was no reason for him to go straight to the city lord's room. Wouldn't that be walking right into a trap? Therefore, after confirming that Xiao Chen and Tianyu were really going to the city lord's room, the group of guards did not think too much about it. However, the leader was a little more cautious. He immediately ordered two of his subordinates to accompany Xiao Chen to the city lord's room. He thought that he was smart, but he did not know that Xiao Chen's heart was blooming with joy when he heard the leader's words. He was going to the city lord's room anyway. Now that he had two guards accompanying him, he would be very safe along the way. Even if he met other guards, he would not have to worry. He readily agreed to the leader's request. When the leader saw this, the doubts in his heart lessened. Then, he led his men and left. With the two guards accompanying him, they arrived at the city lord's room without any problems. The two guards did not enter the courtyard. On the other hand, Xiao Chen brought Tianyu and swaggered into the courtyard. It was already late at night, but the lights in the study room were still on. It was apparent that the city lord was not asleep yet. There were also two guards guarding the door. As they walked into the study room, Xiao Chen whispered to Tianyu. One each. Quickly get rid of these two. After hearing Xiao Chen's words, Tianyu nodded. Soon, the two of them arrived outside the study room. Seeing the two of them approaching, one of the guards stopped them and asked. Hold it. What's the matter? Sir, Xiaochen bowed. But before he finished his sentence, a cold glint flashed. Then, a dagger directly pierced the guard's heart. At the same time, Tianyu had also successfully launched a sneak attack and killed the other guard. The two guards outside the door were easily killed. Xiaochen pushed the door open and strode in. In the room, the city lord was looking at the materials in his hand. But at this moment, the door was suddenly opened. He lifted his head and saw an unfamiliar young man walking in. The city lord's eyes were filled with doubts. On the other hand, Xiaochen said with a smile, "City lord, it's not easy to find you here. Along the way, there were so many twists and turns. It was like a maze. But I've finally found you. There are some things that I think we can talk about face to face. Begging for collection, begging for monthly votes, begging for recommendations." Chapter 1096. Are you a newcomer? The city lord's expression changed when he heard Xiaochen's words. He was about to call for help, but Xiaochen had already rushed forward and covered the city lord's mouth. He could only make muffled sounds. Xiaochen held the city lord tightly as he struggled. He said with a calm smile on his face, "City lord, don't struggle anymore. Isn't it better for us to sit down and have a good chat?" Although Xiaochen did not have any cultivation, it was not difficult for him to control the city lord who had lived like a prince all year round. Realizing that he could not break free from Xiaochen's grip, the city lord slowly calmed down and stopped struggling. He nodded slightly. Xiaochen released the city lord's mouth when he saw this. However, a dagger was placed on the city lord's neck. As long as the city lord made any strange movements, Xiaochen would be able to kill him in the shortest time possible. The city lord forced himself to remain calm as he felt the chill on his neck. He asked Xiaochen stiffly, "What do you want?" "Nothing much. I just want to leave this damned place. I heard that the city lord has a stone hall token. I think that if the city lord can give me the token and lead us to the stone hall, everyone will be happy." Xiaochen chuckled softly. He had already guessed that the exit of Nine Heavens City was in the mysterious stone hall deep in the backyard of the city lord's mansion. Therefore, Xiaochen's purpose for this trip was very clear. It was the token. The city lord's face darkened when he heard this. He could not figure out how Xiaochen knew about the token. He inadvertently looked at Tianyu. Seeing this, the city lord suddenly had a bad premonition. Since Tianyu is here, then where's my son? A monstrous hatred flashed across the city lord's eyes. He looked at Xiaochen and asked coldly, "Where's my son? What did you do to him?" "Don't worry, your son is fine. As long as you hand over the token, I won't hurt him." "How about it?" Xiaochen said with a smile. Xiaochen had lied to the city lord. He had no choice but to do this in order to get the token. As expected, the city lord heaved a sigh of relief when he heard that his son was still alive. Then, he began to weigh the pros and cons. On one side was the ancestral token, and on the other was the life of his only son. The city lord had to make a choice between the two. Of course, the city lord did not know that his son had already been killed by Xiaochen. He didn't urge Xiaochen. In the end, the city lord made his choice. He took out an ancient token from a secret compartment on the bookshelf and handed it to Xiaochen. "This is the token to open the stone hall." "Where's my son?" the city lord said coldly as he handed the token to Xiaochen. Hearing this, Xiaochen took the token and said without any change in his expression, "I'll send you to see him now." After saying that, the frost python dagger in Xiaochen's hand flashed and pierced into the city lord's heart. The city lord did not expect Xiaochen to suddenly kill him. He looked at Xiaochen unwillingly and said, You went back on your word." "No, I said that I would send you to see your son," Xiaochen said. You killed my son," the city lord said unwillingly in the end. Then, he fell powerlessly into a pool of blood. Seeing that Xiaochen killed the city lord without hesitation, Tianyu said, You lied to him." "That's right, Xiaochen did lie to the city lord and killed him in the end. However, Xiaochen didn't feel that he did anything wrong. In order to survive, he had no choice but to use these despicable tricks. If we don't do this, we might be the ones to die. Don't forget that we don't have any cultivation now. If we alert the guards of the city lord's mansion, we'll be finished, Xiaochen said after hearing Tianyue's words. Perhaps in Tianyue's opinion, the first holy son of the Northern Star Realm like her and Xiaochen shouldn't use such despicable means to deceive others. Xiaochen's method was somewhat despicable. However, unlike Tianyue, Xiaochen didn't feel that there was anything wrong with his method. Staying alive was the most important thing. If he didn't even have his life, what else was there to talk about? In Xiaochen's eyes, a person who would give up the chance to live for the sake of being open and aboveboard was no different from an idiot. He didn't explain too much to Tianyue. After all, the two of them had different experiences growing up. Compared to Xiaochen, Tianyue could be considered a flower that grew up in a greenhouse. Although she had experienced many battles, Tianyue really didn't have much experience with the dangers of time. After keeping the token, the two of them changed into the clothes of the two guards outside the door. Then, the two of them walked towards the stone hall in the depths of the backyard. With the identity of the two guards, it was indeed a lot more convenient to do things. At the very least, the two of them didn't encounter any obstacles along the way. As for the corpses of the city lord and his son, Xiaochen didn't care at all. When the corpses of the father and son were discovered tomorrow, Xiaochen and Tianyue would probably have left Nine Heavens City. They didn't encounter any obstacles along the way to the backyard. From afar, Xiaochen could already see an ordinary-looking stone hall. There wasn't anything special about it. It looked very simple. Furthermore, there weren't many people around. Perhaps it was because they felt that the stone hall was very safe, so the successive city lords didn't arrange for anyone to guard the stone hall. Thinking about it, the stone hall was very likely built by the Heavenly Emperor Sage. In this way, in Nine Heavens City, where there were no cultivators, it was naturally very safe. Furthermore, the token to open the stone hall was always kept by the current city lord. As long as the token wasn't lost, no one could enter the stone hall. In this way, there was naturally no need for anyone to guard the stone hall. However, this made Xiaochen and Tianyue overjoyed. Without anyone guarding the stone hall, it would naturally save them a lot of trouble. They strode to the stone hall. The two stone doors were tightly shut. However, in the middle of the stone door, there was a groove. The shape was exactly the same as the token. I wonder what kind of secrets this stone palace holds, Xiaochen murmured to himself as he placed the token into the groove. Then, the stone door slowly opened. They couldn't see anything inside the stone hall. It was pitch black inside. However, when the stone door opened, Xiaochen and Tianyue looked at each other. Then, they walked into the stone hall together. The stone hall was very likely to be the entrance to the most precious treasure in above heavens, the Heavenly Emperor record. Therefore, when they walked into the stone hall, even Xiaochen couldn't help but feel a little excited. After working hard for so long and experiencing countless dangers, they finally saw the light of victory. How could they not be excited? Begging for collection, begging for monthly votes, begging for recommendations. Chapter 1097. They stepped into the stone palace. Just as Xiaochen and Tianyue entered the palace, the stone door suddenly closed. At the same time, the surrounding walls of the stone palace emitted a burst of light. In an instant, the entire stone palace was illuminated with an incomparably clear light. The stone hall wasn't very large and there wasn't much in it. However, there was a stone door at the center of the stone hall. This stone door was exactly the same as the stone door that connected to the 9 heavens above heaven. Where does this stone door lead to? Tianyue looked at the stone door and asked doubtfully. Hearing this, Xiaochen curiously went forward to size up the stone door. After which, he pushed the stone door open and said indifferently, "No matter where it leads to, we don't seem to have any other choice. It's better to be trapped in 9 Heavens City without any cultivation." Now that the city lord and his son had been killed by him, their bodies would definitely be discovered once the sun rose. At that time, if Xiaochen and Tianyu were still in the city, it would be dangerous. After all, Xiaochen and Tianyu were ordinary people without any cultivation in Nine Heaven City. It was impossible for them to fend off the thousands of guards in the city lord's estate. Tianyu nodded when he heard Xiaochen's words. After which, the two of them stepped into the stone door and instantly disappeared. Not long after, when the two of them regained their consciousness, they arrived at a world filled with birds and fragrant flowers. The surroundings were filled with green trees and grass. However, there was a ball of light floating in mid-air at the center. When he saw the ball of light, Xiaochen was puzzled. Sky Emperor record? I don't know. Tianyu shook his head when he heard this. It didn't seem like there was any danger here. It should be the final place in Nine Heaven City. Moreover, Xiaochen and Tianyu's cultivations had completely returned. When he felt the surging spiritual energy in his body, Xiaochen smiled and said, "It's still better to have cultivation." Suddenly turning from a Tao Emperor stage expert to an ordinary person was indeed a terrible feeling. Now that his cultivation had returned, Xiaochen felt much better about himself. With a cultivation base, it was equivalent to having confidence. It was not like in the Nine Heaven City, where he could not fight back when he encountered danger. They walked towards the ball of light together. In the end, Xiaochen gestured for Tianyu to take the ball of light. After all, it was very likely that the Heavenly Emperor record was within it, and the Heavenly Emperor record was the most precious treasure of the Sky Clan. Naturally, it was best for Tianyu to take it. Xiaochen didn't covet the Heavenly Emperor record too much. Firstly, it was because Nine Heavens and the Sacred Palace were currently in an alliance. Xiaochen naturally wouldn't break the alliance just because of the Heavenly Emperor record. Secondly, no matter how precious the Heavenly Emperor record was, Xiaochen wouldn't snatch it from Tianyu's hands. Seeing that Xiaochen had given the opportunity to her, a happy smile appeared on Tianyu's face. She stepped forward and extended her hand into the ball of light. Very quickly, an ancient rune tablet appeared in her hand. Xiaochen was no stranger to ancient rune tablets. Xiaochen had already seen one in the Sky Expanse sect's secret territory. However, the ancient rune tablet in Tianyu's hand was different from the one he saw in the Sky Expanse sect's secret territory. It was completely golden and much larger in size. With a single glance, one could tell that the value of this ancient rune tablet far exceeded the few ancient rune tablets in the Sky Expanse sect's secret territory. The Heavenly Emperor record should be recorded in this ancient rune tablet, right? Xiaochen smiled as he looked at Tianyu. There was only relief on his face, and there wasn't the slightest bit of greed. I've finally obtained the Heavenly Emperor record. I'm safe now, Xiaochen thought. Tianyu smiled faintly at Xiaochen's words. It was rare for her to tease Xiaochen. Why? Is little brother not the least bit tempted by the Heavenly Emperor record? It could be said that it was the most precious treasure of the Sky Clan. There weren't many people in the entire northern star boundary who wouldn't be tempted by the Heavenly Emperor record. Xiaochen snapped at Tianyu's joke. This belongs to your Sky Clan. What's there to be tempted by? Besides, didn't Supreme Sovereign Tianyun promise me a great opportunity? Alright, keep it well and look around to see if there are any other treasures. If there aren't any, it's time for us to return. After instructing Tianyu to keep the ancient rune tablet well, Xiaochen and Tianyu searched the surroundings again. However, they didn't find anything else of value. Presumably, the ancient rune tablet recorded all the treasures left behind by the Supreme Sovereign Tianyu. However, Tianyu didn't know what was recorded in the ancient rune tablet. She didn't know what was recorded in the ancient rune tablet. Everything would have to wait until they returned to the Ninth Heaven, and the three quasi-saint Supreme Sovereigns of the Ninth Heaven would personally open it to check. Since they didn't find anything else of value, Xiaochen and Tianyu began to think of a way to leave this place. In fact, it wasn't difficult. Very quickly, the two of them found the exit to the sky beyond. Now that the two of them had successfully passed through the 9 heavens of the above heavens, there was naturally no danger. Just as the two of them were about to leave, Tianyu suddenly asked, "Xiaochen, now that we have taken away the Heavenly Emperor record, what do you think will happen to the people in the 9 Heaven City?" The existence of the 9 Heaven City was to test the future generations. Now that the Heavenly Emperor record had been taken away by the two of them, the above Heaven City had lost its value. The people in the 9 Heaven City were naturally useless. Hearing this, Xiaochen fell silent for a moment. Then, he said indifferently, "They will probably continue to live here like this in this small world that no one knows about." The 9 Heaven City could be said to be completely isolated from the outside world. Furthermore, the people inside couldn't cultivate at all. It was like a paradise. Perhaps the people who lived in the 9 Heaven City only knew that the 9 Heaven City was as big as the North Star boundary. They didn't know that the 9 Heaven City was as small as a grain of sand when compared to the vastness of the North Star boundary. They had never interacted with the outside world since they were young. Their lives were simple and honest. Hearing Xiaochen's words, Tianyu said with pity, "Then they are so pitiful. They have to live in the small 9 Heaven City for their entire lives." Pitiful? I feel that this is a kind of fortune. At least the 9 Heaven City may be small, but it is safe. The chaos of the outside world won't affect the 9 Heaven City at all. In the 9 Heaven City, they can at least enjoy a rare peace," Xiaochen said. Without waiting for Tianyu's reply, Xiaochen took the initiative to hold her hand and walked towards the exit. At the same time, he said slowly, "All right, the 9 Heaven City is ultimately not in the same world as us. Let's not disturb the peace of the 9 Heaven City. Begging for collection, begging for monthly votes, begging for recommendations." Chapter 1098. In Xiaochen's opinion, he probably wouldn't have any more interactions with 9 Heaven City in the future. As for the people in 9 Heaven City without any cultivation base, they should still be living in 9 Heaven City as usual. 9 Heaven City was like a city locked in a cage. The people in it didn't know the vastness of the world at all, but in Xiaochen's words, it was also a kind of luck to be able to live here. Because the outside world wasn't suitable for ordinary people like them, it was better to live in 9 Heaven City than to become ants that could be killed at any time in the outside world. It was a cage at any time, but it was also safe. This cage seemed to be imprisoning them, but from another perspective, it was also a kind of protection. At least they could live a peaceful and stable life here. However, Xiaochen didn't think too much about it. He held Tianyu's hand and the two walked through the exit together, leaving Sky Beyond Sky. It had been almost a month in Sky Beyond Sky. After going through hardships, Xiaochen and Tianyu finally obtained the Sky Emperor record. When the two left Sky Beyond Sky and returned to 9 Heavens, they still appeared at the entrance. However, as soon as Xiaochen and Tianyu appeared, Supreme Sovereign Tianyun also appeared in front of them. Obviously, Supreme Sovereign Tianyun had been paying attention to this place during this period, so she sensed Xiaochen and Tianyu as soon as they came out. Seeing the two return safely from above sky, Supreme Sovereign Tianyun couldn't help but smile. "You succeeded?" There was a hint of surprise in her words. It could make a quasi-sage Supreme Sovereign lose control of her emotions. This showed how important the Sky Emperor record was to the Sky Clan. Hearing Supreme Sovereign Tianyun's words, Tianyu smiled and replied, "Yes, I succeeded." Tianyu also handed the golden ancient rune steel to Supreme Sovereign Tianyun. Looking at the ancient rune steel in her hand, Supreme Sovereign Tianyun felt that the golden ancient rune steel in her hand weighed 1,000 pounds. After the efforts of generations of saints in 9 Heavens, they finally obtained the Sky Emperor record today. Even Supreme Sovereign Tianyun was a little overwhelmed. Fortunately, Supreme Sovereign Tianyun was no ordinary individual. She quickly calmed down and quietly kept the golden ancient rune tablet. After which, she looked at Xiaochen and smiled. This time, it's all thanks to Chosen Xiaochen's help. Don't worry, the alliance between the Sacred Palace and 9 Heavens has basically been set. The Supreme Divine Sect and Liwang Sect also have intentions of forming an alliance and have already sent people to the Sacred Palace. Also, I won't go back on my word about the great opportunity. Rest for a few days. I'll send someone to inform you when the time comes. Since Xiaochen had helped Tianyu obtain the ancient rune steel, Grand Venerate Tianyun wouldn't go back on her words. Hearing Great Senior Tianyun's words, Xiaochen cupped his hands and bowed. Great Senior is too serious. I'm just doing my best. Haha, alright, you don't need to be humble. Go and rest first. By the way, someone came all the way from the Sacred Palace to 9 Heavens and has been waiting for you. Supreme Sovereign Tianyun was in a good mood when she heard Xiaochen's words. Xiaochen was taken aback when he heard Supreme Sovereign Tianyun say that someone had come from the Sacred Palace to 9 Heavens. After some questioning, Xiaochen learned that Qin Shuru and the other 2 girls had come from the Sacred Palace to 9 Heavens. The 3 girls were probably worried that something would happen to him. Xiaochen couldn't help but smile when he heard that the 3 girls were in 9 Heavens. Tianyu couldn't help but feel a little jealous when she saw Xiaochen's sweet smile when he heard that Qin Shuru and the other 2 girls had come. Even when Supreme Sovereign Tianyun spoke to her, Tianyu didn't respond in a good mood. Tianyu, you should also go and rest. Come to the main hall tomorrow morning. Tianyu coldly snorted and said, I'm not tired. However, someone has probably wanted to return to his home for a long time. Tianyu turned and left without waiting for Xiaochen's reply. Xiaochen was a little puzzled when he saw Tianyu's departing figure. What was wrong with that girl? Wasn't she fine just now? However, a strange look flashed across Supreme Sovereign Tianyun's eyes before she shook her head helplessly. Xiaochen didn't know what was wrong with Tianyu for her to suddenly become so angry, but he couldn't care less now. Qin Shuru and the other 2 girls had come all the way to 9 Heavens and Xiaochen wanted to see them as soon as possible. Xiaochen no longer thought about Tianyu. After bidding farewell to Supreme Sovereign Tianyun, he went straight to the residence of Qin Shuru and the other 2 girls. They had specially arranged accommodations for the 3 girls and the Sacred Palace had also sent 2 sacred sovereigns to accompany them. When Xiaochen arrived at the residence of the 3 girls, he saw the 3 girls sitting in a bamboo pavilion in the courtyard as soon as he entered the backyard. With a smile on his face, Xiaochen happily stepped forward. He originally wanted to give the 3 girls a hug, but unfortunately, he didn't get a hug. Instead, he was reprimanded. Stop, Qin Shuru shouted when he saw Xiaochen quickly walking over. Hearing this, Xiaochen unconsciously stopped and looked at the 3 women in confusion. However, at this time, the 3 women all looked cold and stern, and there was a faint anger in their eyes. It seemed that they were angry. Sure enough, seeing Xiaochen stop, Qin Shuru continued, Do you still have us in your heart? Entering above heavens is such a big matter, but you didn't even discuss it with us. Have you ever thought about what we would do if something happened to you in above heavens? Obviously, the 3 girls were very angry about Xiaochen's decision to enter above heavens on his own. Xiaochen was also helpless about this. He had no choice at all in that situation. Xiaochen comforted the 3 girls softly in the face of their anger. However, no matter what Xiaochen said this time, the 3 girls refused to let him go. Even Gu Lingyao stood firmly on the same side as Qin Shuru and Bai Yuan Jin. While Xiaochen was doing his best to coax the 3 girls, on the other side, Tianyu was sitting in the courtyard with a face full of anger. She cursed in a low voice, Stinky Xiaochen, damned Xiaochen, you value your lover over your friends. Don't tell me that I have no place in your heart at all. The moment you heard that your wife is coming, you can't wait to go over. You're infuriating me to death. Tianyu scolded continuously. She didn't know why, but when she saw the sweet smile on Xiaochen's face when Qin Shuru and the other 2 girls arrived, Tianyu couldn't help but feel angry. When he was with her, Xiaochen had never revealed such a smile. For a moment, Tianyu felt incomparably jealous. Just as Tianyu was cursing Xiaochen, a girl who was about the same age as Tianyu and had outstanding looks walked into the courtyard. Begging for your collection, begging for monthly votes, begging for recommendations. Chapter 1099. The young lady who walked into the courtyard was also wearing the Holy Sun robe of 9 heavens. Her name was Lanya, and she was the second holy daughter of 9 heavens. Among the younger generation of 9 heavens, her strength was second only to Tianyu. Besides, perhaps due to their similar status and strength, Lanya and Tianyu had been close friends since they were young. This time, Lanya had been sweating profusely for Tianyu after she entered above heavens. After hearing that Tianyu had returned safely from above heavens and obtained the Sky Emperor record, Lanya couldn't wait to visit her. She wanted to congratulate Tianyu for obtaining the Sky Emperor record, but as soon as she entered the courtyard, she saw Tianyu cursing under her breath in anger. Lanya walked over with a smile. "Yo, what's wrong? Who made our holy daughter Tianyu angry?" At first, Tianyu didn't notice Lanya's arrival, but after hearing these words, Tianyu jumped up like a cat whose tail was stepped on, and said in a panic. "And no." Tianyu was nervous. Lanya's smile widened. Tianyu had never shown such an expression before. In an instant, Lanya was even more certain that Tianyu must have something on her mind. Lanya wasn't in a hurry. She strolled to Tianyu's side and sat down. Then, she seemed to be chatting casually, but she kept asking Tianyu what was wrong. Under Lanya's constant questioning, Tianyu told her why she was angry. After hearing that it was because of Xiaochen, a strange glint flashed in Lanya's eyes. Perhaps Tianyu didn't know why she was so angry, but Lanya knew clearly that Tianyu was probably, however, Lanya didn't point it out. It was hard to say what happened between Tianyu and Xiaochen. After all, Tianyu was the first holy daughter of 9 heavens and could be said to be the goddess of the entire sky race. Besides, the sky race was extremely xenophobic, so it was hard to say what happened between Tianyu and Xiaochen. At the very least, there would be a lot of resistance. In addition, both parties involved had not realized the other party's attitude. Even Tianyu was confused and did not know why she was so angry. Therefore, Lanya did not point it out. Instead, she quickly changed the topic. With Lanya's company, Tianyu's mood improved quickly. The two of them chatted casually in the courtyard. Of course, most of the time, Tianyu told Lanya about her and Xiaochen's experience in above heavens. Looking at the smile on Tianyu's face every time she mentioned Xiaochen, Lanya could not help but sigh inwardly. This little girl had probably fallen too deep into it. While Tianyu and Lanya were chatting, Xiaochen on the other side had finally appeased Qin Shiru and the other 2 women. The anger in the 3 women's hearts had dissipated. In fact, the reason why the 3 of them were so angry was entirely because they were worried about Xiaochen. This made Xiaochen feel warm in his heart. Because Supreme Venerate Tianyan promised to give Xiaochen a great opportunity, Xiaochen didn't intend to leave 9 heavens so quickly. After all, he had narrowly escaped death this time. Although he had obtained a lot of benefits, such as the ancient ghost withered vine's tree sap, Xiaochen's physical body had improved a lot. Now that there was a great opportunity waiting for him, Xiaochen naturally wouldn't give it up. He stayed in 9 heavens with Qin Shiru and the other 2 girls. On the morning of the 2nd day, Supreme Venerate Tianyun and the other 3 quasi-saint venerables of 9 heavens gathered in the main hall of 9 heavens. Tianyu was also present. There were only 4 people in the huge hall. In front of the 4 of them, the golden ancient rune tablet was suspended in mid-air. In the end, Supreme Venerate Tianyun personally opened the ancient rune tablet. What was recorded in the ancient rune tablet was the Heavenly Emperor record. As the ancient rune tablet was opened, even Supreme Venerate Tianyun and the other 3 quasi-saint venerables couldn't help but be excited. This was the inheritance left behind by a supreme saint. The ancient rune tablet was opened, and the contents were soon presented to the 4 of them. Most of them were the various superpowers of the sky race. It was very comprehensive, from low to high, and almost covered all the sky race superpowers that the Heavenly Emperor Great Sage had mastered in his life. In addition, there were 2 more important records. They were records about the use and cultivation of the Sky Race mark, and records about how to break through to the Great Saint Realm. These two records were extremely valuable, especially the one about the use and cultivation of the Sky Race mark. As everyone knew, the source of power of the Sky Race all came from the mark on their foreheads. Unlike the human race, the Sky Race didn't have an elixir field. The mark on their foreheads was equivalent to the elixir field of other races. They were born with it, and as their cultivation realm increased, the power of the mark would become stronger. How to use and cultivate the mark on the forehead was directly related to the strength of the Sky Race. Unable to hide the excitement in their eyes, Supreme Venerate Tianyun and the other three quasi-saint venerables looked at the records in front of them in surprise. After a long while, Supreme Venerate Tianyun put away the golden ancient rune tablet and suppressed the excitement in her heart. Tianyu has made a great contribution this time. With this, the strength of our Sky Race will soar a lot. Upon hearing Supreme Venerate Tianyun's words, the other two quasi-saint Supreme Venerates nodded in agreement. However, Tianyu suddenly spoke up. Supreme Venerate, I would like to make a copy of the method to break through to the Great Saint Realm for the Sacred Palace. After all, Chosen Xiao Chen's contribution is indispensable for obtaining the Heavenly Emperor record. Without him, I definitely wouldn't have been able to successfully obtain the Heavenly Emperor record. Tianyu actually spoke up for the Sacred Palace at such a time. In fact, rather than saying it was for the Sacred Palace, it was better to say it was for Xiao Chen. In Tianyu's heart, the trip to above heavens this time was indeed thanks to Xiao Chen's help. She originally wanted to give Xiao Chen more things, but the content recorded in the Heavenly Emperor record was only the record on how to break through to the Great Saint Realm that was helpful to the Sacred Palace. The other Sky Race divine abilities and the method to cultivate the Sky Race mark were useless to the Sacred Palace. Even if they obtained it, no one in the Sacred Palace would be able to cultivate it. Therefore, after thinking about it, only the record on how to break through to the Great Saint Realm would be helpful to the Sacred Palace and Xiao Chen. Supreme Venerate Tianyun and the other two looked at each other when they heard Tianyu's words. In the end, one of them, who looked like an old man, spoke up. The record on how to break through to the Great Saint Realm? Never mind, let's make a copy and give it to the Sacred Palace as a way of thanking Xiao Chen for his help this time. They didn't reject Tianyu's suggestion. After all, the record on how to break through to the Great Saint Realm wasn't considered a secret. It wouldn't be a loss for the Sky Race in 9 heavens, so it wasn't impossible to make a copy and give it to the Sacred Palace. Seeking collection, seeking monthly votes, seeking recommendations. Chapter 1100. The three Supreme Venerates agreed to Tianyu's proposal. After all, this record of breaking through to the Great Saint Realm only pointed out the path. It didn't mean that it could definitely help people break through to the Great Saint Realm. It could even be said that those who could break through to the Great Saint Realm would break through sooner or later. It was useless for those who couldn't break through to the Great Saint Realm even if they knew this because they didn't have the qualifications to break through to the Great Saint Realm. Because of this, it wasn't a big deal to give this record of breaking through to the Great Saint Realm to the Sacred Palace. Moreover, it could also do a favor to the Sacred Palace. Why not? In fact, Great Venerate Tianyun and the others were very conflicted about this record of breaking through to the Great Sage Realm, because this thing was indeed precious because there was no record of the Great Sage Realm in the entire North Star boundary. It could be said that the record of the Emperor Sage Realm and the Emperor record was a priceless treasure. However, although it was precious, it was also of little value in other aspects because even if you obtained it, you still couldn't break through to the Great Saint Realm if your talent wasn't enough. Because of this, Supreme Venerate Tianyun was very conflicted about this record of the Great Saint Realm. It was both precious and worthless. Perhaps it was because of this that Supreme Venerate Tianyun and the others agreed to make a copy of it and give it to the Sacred Palace. Tianyu thanked them happily after receiving the agreement of the three Supreme Venerates. The reason she proposed to make a copy of this thing and give it to the Sacred Palace was mostly because of Xiao Chen. He put away the golden ancient inscription tablet properly. It wasn't an exaggeration to say that the Sky Race mystic ability and the cultivation method of the Sky Race imprint were the ultimate treasures of the ninth heaven. Therefore, these things were naturally kept by the three quasi-saint supreme venerates. Of course, as a meritorious person, Tianyu could cultivate the divine ability at any time since she had successfully brought back the Emperor God record and was the first Holy Lady of Nine Heavens. The three supreme venerates didn't tell anyone about the contents of the Emperor God record after secretly opening it. These things were the foundation of Nine Heavens and would gradually be passed down to the many disciples under them in the future. After staying in the large hall for about 4 hours, Alchemy Venerate Tianyun and the others left. Tianyu also left the large hall. Tianyu originally planned to return to her residence, but for some reason, she actually came to Xiao Chen's residence. A complicated look flashed in Tianyu's eyes as she stood outside the courtyard. She didn't know why she had come here. Just as Tianyu was hesitating about whether to go in, the courtyard door was suddenly opened and a beautiful young girl with 2 ponytails walked out. The girl was none other than Guling Yao. After what had happened yesterday, the little girl had regained her lively personality and was no longer angry with Xiao Chen. Guling Yao bounced open the courtyard door, but when she saw Tianyu standing outside, she was stunned for a moment, but she quickly recovered and smiled politely. Looking at the Nine Heavens Holy Sun robe that Tianyu was wearing, Guling Yao naturally assumed that she was here to look for Xiao Chen. Tianyu forced a smile and said, "Yes, I have some matters to discuss with Xiao Chen." Tianyu didn't know why, but she always felt a little uncomfortable when facing Guling Yao. Tianyu's character wouldn't be like this, but she couldn't help it. She just couldn't control her nervousness. Guling Yao, on the other hand, came forward with great enthusiasm and personally led Tianyu into the courtyard. In the backyard, Xiao Chen, who was cultivating, saw Guling Yao bring Tianyu in. He didn't think much and took the initiative to greet them and introduce them to each other. After knowing Tianyu's identity, Qin Shuru and the others greeted her in a friendly manner. However, Tianyu just nodded coldly, as if she was a little nervous. Xiao Chen didn't notice Tianyu's abnormality, but 100 Flower Fairy saw some clues. However, she didn't point it out. Instead, she took the initiative to speak to Xiao Chen. "Husband, holy daughter Tianyu must have something to discuss with you. You can chat, we'll take our leave first." She took the initiative to lead Qin Shuru and Guling Yao out of the courtyard. After the 3 women left, Xiao Chen personally invited Tianyu to sit in the pavilion in the courtyard. He asked as he poured a cup of tea for Tianyu. "Is there something you want to discuss with me?" Without Qin Shuru and the other 2 women, Tianyu felt a lot more relaxed. She immediately replied, "Why? Can I look for you if there's nothing?" Xiao Chen was stunned by Tianyu's words. What's wrong with this girl? She had been inexplicably angry since she came back yesterday. Today, her words were also sarcastic. He didn't seem to have offended her, right? The sarcastic tone in Tianyu's words made Xiao Chen a little confused. He didn't remember provoking her. Tianyu couldn't help but laugh when she saw Xiao Chen's gloomy face. "All right, I naturally have something to discuss with you. Look at you, you look like you've been wronged." Without Qin Shuru and the other 2 women present, Tianyu was indeed a lot more relaxed. Then, Tianyu briefly told Xiao Chen about the Sky Emperor records. Finally, she told Xiao Chen that Nine Heavens was going to copy a record of the Great Saint stage and send it to the Sacred Palace. Xiao Chen naturally wouldn't refuse Tianyu's request. The record of the Great Saint stage was indeed a peerless treasure. Only a fool would refuse. He immediately agreed. Then, the 2 of them sat in the pavilion. Perhaps because Xiao Chen was a little anxious, Tianyu also dictated the record of the Great Saint stage to Xiao Chen. In fact, the record of the Great Saint stage was only a few short sentences. The Great Saint stage stands above the heavens. In order to become a great saint, in addition to origin energy, one must also sail against the current and break through the heavens. The meaning of these words was very simple. In order to break through to the Great Saint stage, in addition to having sufficient origin energy, one must also sail against the current and break through the heavens. Hearing Tianyu's words, Xiaochen seemed to be reciting. Sail against the current and break through the heavens? These two sentences were the key to breaking through to the Great Saint stage. However, Xiaochen didn't have the slightest clue about this so-called sailing against the current and breaking through the heavens. What was breaking through the heavens? What did it mean? He couldn't figure it out. Tianyu smiled faintly and said, "If you can't figure it out, then don't think about it. In any case, we're only at the Tao Emperor stage now. Let alone the Great Saint stage, even the Saint stage is still very far away. Moreover, the meaning of these two sentences should be understood when we break through to the Quasi-Saint stage one day. As for now, let's leave this question to the great sovereigns to figure it out themselves. Begging for collection, begging for monthly votes, begging for recommendations." Chapter 1101. Sailing against the current, breaking through the sky. These were the two most important sentences in the records of the Great Saint realm. However, Xiaochen still couldn't understand the meaning of these two sentences. Hearing Tianyu's words, Xiaochen didn't dwell on it anymore. Indeed, he was only at the initial Tao Emperor stage. It was a little too early to think about these things now. After taking a sip of tea, Xiaochen smiled and said, "That's right. It's still too early to think about these things. At least, I have to wait until I break through to the Saint realm before considering these problems. That's for the best. It's useless to think about these things now. It's better to think about the matter at hand first. Great Senior promised to give you a great opportunity. You have to be prepared." Hearing this, Tianyu also smiled and said. Xiao Chen's interest was piqued when he heard Tianyu talk about the great opportunity mentioned by Supreme Venerate Tianyun. He had always been curious about the great opportunity mentioned by Supreme Venerate Tianyun. After all, if a quasi-sage Supreme Venerate called it a great opportunity, it must not be simple. Since Tianyu mentioned this matter now, Xiaochen also asked, "Do you know what the great opportunity that Great Senior Tianyun mentioned is?" "Of course I know." Tianyu smiled and said. "Really? Why don't you tell me so that I can be prepared?" Xiaochen said. Tianyu knew what the great opportunity that Great Senior Tianyun mentioned was. Under Xiaochen's questioning, she also told Xiaochen the truth. According to Tianyu, the great opportunity that Great Senior Tianyun mentioned should be the Heavenly Thunder Realm. There were many cultivation secret realms in 9 heavens, but there were only 2 that could truly be said to be unparalleled in the world and could be called the foundation of 9 heavens. One was the Heavenly Domain Secret Realm, and the other was the Heavenly Thunder Realm. These 2 secret zones could be said to be the foundation of 9 heavens. The Sky Domain Secret Zone could be said to be the holy land of cultivation that all 9 heavens disciples dreamed of. Unfortunately, the Sky Domain Secret Zone wasn't a place that could be entered casually. Even holy sons and holy daughters wouldn't be able to enter it easily. Even Tianyua, the number 1 holy maiden of the 9 heavens, had only entered the Heaven Domain Secret Realm twice. Furthermore, she had only stayed there for less than 10 days each time. But even so, going to the Sky Domain Mystic Realm twice still gave Tianyu unimaginable benefits. As for the Heavenly Thunder World, it was one of the 2 secret realms of the 9 heavens that was equally as famous as the Heaven Domain Secret Realm. Naturally, it was also extremely extraordinary. However, it was a pity that compared to the Heaven Domain Secret Realm, the Heavenly Thunder World seemed to be neglected. This wasn't to say that the Heavenly Thunder Realm wasn't good. On the contrary, the Heavenly Thunder Realm wasn't inferior to the Heaven Domain Mystic Realm at all. The reason for this was because of the Heaven Race's cultivation. The greatest benefit of the Heavenly Thunder World was the cultivation of the physical body. In terms of the cultivation of the physical body, the Heavenly Thunder World could be said to be the best secret zone in the entire North Star boundary. However, there were almost no people who cultivated the physical body in the Tian clan, because the cultivation of the Tian clan was closely related to the Tian clan imprint, and they all revolved around the Tian clan imprint. As a result, there was naturally no one who cultivated the physical body. Without anyone cultivating the physical body, the heavenly thunder world naturally didn't have much use for the heaven race. Therefore, the heavenly thunder world seemed very deserted. There was almost no one who went back to pay attention to the heavenly thunder world. However, the value and strength of the heavenly thunder world couldn't be denied. This was because the Liwang sect in Myriad Beasts Valley had proposed to the Nine Heavens more than once that they were willing to pay a huge price in exchange for the heavenly thunder world. The heavenly thunder world was of little value to the heaven race because they didn't cultivate the physical body. However, to the barbarian race and beast race, it was simply a priceless treasure, especially to the barbarian race. He remembered that the most recent time was 20 years ago. A quasi-sage great sovereign of the Liwang sect personally came and was willing to use 2 secret zones of the Liwang sect to exchange for the heavenly thunder world. To be able to offer such a high price, it could be seen how much the Liwang sect coveted the heavenly thunder world. From this, it could be seen how powerful the heavenly thunder world was. Xiao Chen's tempered battle physique was very strong. Therefore, the heavenly thunder world was undoubtedly of great help to Xiao Chen. After telling Xiao Chen about the heavenly thunder world in detail, Xiao Chen was secretly excited. Now that his tempered battle physique had reached the limit of the second layer of the Jade Organ realm, if the heavenly thunder world was as Tianyu said, then he had a high chance of breaking through to the third layer of the heavenly thunder body. Thinking about it, if the tempered battle physique broke through to the third layer of the heavenly thunder body, at that time, even if he was compared to the first saint of the Liwang sect, Tong Huang, his physical body wouldn't be much inferior. He was secretly looking forward to it. Seeing the light in Xiao Chen's eyes, Tianyu smiled and said, "Moreover, because no one has entered the heavenly thunder world for many years, there is a lot of heavenly thunder accumulated inside. It is completely enough for your physical body to cultivate. Therefore, this time, you have gained a huge advantage." If Tong Huang knew about it, he would probably be jealous to death. Because no one had entered the heavenly thunder world for many years, it was definitely the best time to cultivate. At this time, the first person to enter would be able to obtain unexpected benefits. Hearing Tianyu's words, Xiao Chen smiled slightly. He really wanted to see what kind of expression Tong Huang would have when he found out that he had entered the heavenly thunder world. The two of them chatted in the courtyard, and on the other side, Qin Shuru and the other 2 girls were sitting together. Gu Lingyao looked at Hundred Flower Fairy with a puzzled expression and asked, "Sister Hundred Flower, why did you pull us out?" Previously, Hundred Flower Fairy had forcefully pulled the 2 of them out, and Gu Lingyao was very puzzled. Hearing this, Hundred Flower Fairy smiled and said, "I say, didn't you feel Tianyu's attitude towards my husband?" Hundred Flower Fairy was indeed an intelligent woman, but she had already felt Tianyu's feelings towards Xiao Chen the first time she met her. That was why she pulled Qin Shuru and Gu Lingyao away. Hearing Hundred Flower Fairy's words, Gu Lingyao's eyes flashed, and she said with some surprise, "Does Sister Hundred Flower mean that Saintess Tianyu likes big brother Xiao Chen?" "That's impossible, she is the number 1 saintess of the 9 heavens. Even she likes big brother Xiao Chen?" Gu Lingyao was pleasantly surprised that Tianyu might like Xiao Chen. Hearing the little girl's words, Hundred Flower Fairy helplessly smiled bitterly and said, "You little girl, now that someone has come to snatch your big brother Xiao Chen, what are you still happy about?" I just didn't expect that someone like Tianyu would like big brother Xiao Chen, Hearing this, Gu Lingyao laughed. She didn't mean to be jealous. As soon as Gu Lingyao finished speaking, Qin Shuru helplessly sighed and said, "Even the number 1 saintess of the 9 heavens has fallen for him. Should I say that my husband is fickle in love, or that his charm is too great that even Tianyu can't resist? Please add, please vote, please recommend." Chapter 1102. Back in the Heavenly River continent, Xiao Chen had made a promise with the 3 girls. But now, Tianyu had appeared. For a moment, the three girls didn't know what to feel. They weren't jealous, because a woman like Tianyu naturally had high standards. The fact that she could take a fancy to Xiaochen was actually proof of Xiaochen's charm. If it were any other woman, the three girls would definitely not agree. But the other party was Tianyu, and the three girls couldn't even bring themselves to be jealous. Take Gu Lingyao for example. Forget about being jealous, when she found out that Tianyu also liked Xiaochen, she was elated. Following Qin Shuru's words, 100 Flower Fairy also sighed softly and said, "But I think my husband doesn't seem to be interested in Tianyu." "Forget it, let's wait and see. I think Tianyu is not a casual woman. Let's see what she has to say first." Hearing this, Qin Shuru said lightly. Xiaochen didn't have any interest in Tianyu, and Tianyu's feelings for Xiaochen were still hazy. Since the two of them hadn't made it clear, 100 Flower Fairy and the other two girls decided to wait and see. Unaware that the three girls had already seen through Tianyu's thoughts, on the other side, after Xiaochen and Tianyu chatted for a while, Tianyu bid farewell and left. Xiaochen personally sent her out of the courtyard. After sending Tianyu off, Qin Shuru and the other two girls returned to the backyard. They didn't mention anything about Tianyu, and Xiaochen obviously didn't think too much about it. At this time, Xiaochen's mind was filled with thoughts about the Sky Thunder Realm. According to Tianyu, being able to enter the Sky Thunder Realm this time was indeed a great opportunity for Xiaochen. In the Sky Thunder Realm, Xiaochen must find a way to improve his physical body's quality. Xiaochen agreed with Tianyu's words. It was a rare opportunity. If he couldn't raise his tempered battle body to the third heavenly level, it would be a waste of this excellent opportunity. Knowing how precious this opportunity was, Xiaochen began to prepare for the Sky Thunder boundary. One day later, Supreme Sovereign Tianyan sent someone to find Xiaochen. Following behind this Nine Heavens Saint, Xiaochen arrived at the Nine Heavens Great Hall. When Xiaochen arrived, Great Paragon Tianyun and Tianyu were already waiting in the Great Hall. Upon seeing Xiaochen, Supreme Venerate Tianyan said faintly, "Tianyu has already told you about the Sky Thunder Realm, right?" "Yes, I did." Xiaochen nodded and replied. He wasn't surprised that Supreme Venerate Tianyan knew that he already knew about the Sky Thunder Realm. Seeing Xiaochen nod, Supreme Venerate Tianyan continued. "There is no time limit for letting you enter the Sky Thunder Realm this time. As long as you can withstand the attack of the Sky Thunder, you can cultivate for as long as you want. Therefore, the longer you can persist, the more benefits you will get. Do your best." Supreme Venerate Tianyun was already very considerate of Xiaochen. Not only did she let Xiaochen enter the Sky Thunder Realm, but she also didn't set a time limit. Xiaochen could cultivate for as long as he could withstand the Sky Thunder in the Sky Thunder Realm. Hearing this, Xiaochen cupped his hands and thanked her. Then, Supreme Venerate Tianyan didn't waste any time and directly brought Xiaochen to the Sky Thunder Realm with Tianyu by his side. As one of the two secret realms of the Nine Heavens, the entrance to the Sky Thunder Realm was naturally a forbidden area. There were 4 saints of the Nine Heavens in charge of guarding it. Without the approval of a quasi-sage, no one was allowed to approach it, let alone enter. This time, with Supreme Venerate Tianyan personally leading the way, Xiaochen and his group naturally didn't encounter any obstacles and smoothly arrived at the entrance of the Sky Thunder Realm. Standing in front of the entrance, Supreme Venerate Tianyan said, "The entrance has been opened. Take this token. If you can't withstand the Sky Thunder Realm, crush the token and you can return. Go." Receiving the token from Supreme Venerate Tianyun, Xiaochen cupped his hands and thanked her. Then, he nodded at Tianyu and strode into the Sky Thunder Realm alone. With Xiaochen's entry, the entrance closed and Supreme Venerate Tianyan left with Tianyu. The opportunity had been given to Xiaochen. As for how much benefit he could get, it would depend on Xiaochen's own ability. Although the Sky Thunder Realm was extremely extraordinary, it wasn't easy to withstand it. Heavenly lightning striking the body wasn't something that ordinary people could endure. Moreover, if one was careless, it was very likely that one would be seriously injured. It wouldn't be strange even if one was killed by the heavenly lightning. Everything depended on Xiao Chen's own ability. Leaving with Tianyu, Supreme Venerate Tianyun brought him all the way to the entrance of the Sky Domain Secret Realm. Supreme Venerate Tianyun looked at Tianyu and said seriously, "The situation in the North Star boundary is about to change greatly. Now, the first holy son of the various major quasi-sage sects have entered seclusion in the place of heritage. When they come out of seclusion, their strength will definitely increase by leaps and bounds. Therefore, Tianyu, you can't fall behind. The great changes in the North Star realm were about to arrive." All the first saints had entered seclusion in their heritage grounds. All the quasi-sage sects in the North Star realm had their own heritage grounds. Of course, the Sacred Palace didn't have one yet. After all, the Sacred Palace had been established for too short a time. In terms of heritage, it naturally couldn't be compared to the other 6 quasi-sage sections. Fortunately, Xiaochen had accidentally obtained the opportunity to enter the Sky Thunder realm this time. This could be considered as making up for the shortcomings of the Sacred Palace. Having arranged for Xiaochen to enter the Sky Thunder realm and Tianyu to enter the Sky Domain Secret Territory, Nine Heavens was obviously preparing for the upcoming upheaval. Tianyu smiled confidently. "Don't worry, Supreme Venerate. I won't fall behind anyone." "That's good. These are the divine abilities of the Sky Clan recorded in the Sky Emperor record, as well as the first law of the imprint cultivation method. Take them and cultivate them together in the Sky Domain Secret Territory," Supreme Venerate Tianyun said with a smile, then took out 2 jades and handed them to Tianyu. She specially selected a few divine abilities of the Sky race for Tianyu to cultivate. After giving a few more instructions, Tianyu entered the Sky Domain Secret Territory. Not knowing that Tianyu had entered the Sky Domain Secret Territory, Xiaochen had already entered the Sky Thunder realm through the entrance. The entire Sky Thunder realm was like the end of the world. The ground was scorched black, and not a single blade of grass grew. Thick black thunderclouds covered the sky, and streaks of lightning were faintly discernible in the black clouds. Just as Xiaochen entered the Sky Thunder realm, a bolt of lightning fell from the sky without any warning, ruthlessly striking Xiaochen. The strong electric current made Xiaochen feel numb. Fortunately, the lightning here wasn't irresistible. Without hesitation, Xiaochen sat down cross-legged and slowly rose into the air. Then, bolts of lightning fell from the sky, continuously striking Xiaochen. Begging for collection, begging for monthly votes, begging for recommendations. Chapter 1103. Closing his eyes, he floated in mid-air as bolts of lightning continuously bombarded Xiaochen's body. The power of these bolts of lightning was not weak. If it wasn't for Xiaochen's strong physical body, he obviously wouldn't be able to withstand it. He finally understood why no one in Nine Heavens was interested in such a heaven-defying secret realm. There weren't many people in the Sky race who cultivated their physical body. If one's physical body wasn't strong enough, not to mention using the Sky Thunder realm to cultivate, even withstanding the baptism of the lightning was difficult. It was precisely because of this that this Sky Thunder realm was in existence that no one cared about in Nine Heavens. However, although the Sky Thunder realm was of little value to the Sky race, to Xiaochen, it was definitely a supreme treasure, especially for the cultivation of the tempered battle body. It had only been a short 15 minutes since he entered the Sky Thunder realm, but Xiaochen could already feel the strengthening of his physical body. Although it was just a little bit, Xiaochen could clearly feel that his physical body was constantly being strengthened. Moreover, with the baptism of the lightning, the impurities in his body were also constantly being expelled from his body. At this moment, there were already drops of black liquid flowing out of Xiaochen's pores. Such a terrifying effect boosted Xiaochen's confidence in breaking through the 3rd level of the tempered body of 100 battles. However, although the effect was good, the feeling was really uncomfortable. With so many bolts of lightning striking his body without any gap, the feeling was really unbearable. Moreover, the most terrible thing was that with the continuous bombardment of the lightning, Xiaochen's body was almost completely numb. No wonder Supreme Venerable Tianyun said that although the Sky Thunder realm was heaven-defying, how much benefits one could obtain still depended on one's own ability. Well, if one couldn't withstand the baptism of the lightning, then they naturally wouldn't obtain any benefits. However, this didn't exist for Xiaochen. Xiaochen could endure the pain. Therefore, facing the attacks of the lightning, Xiaochen wasn't unhappy at all. On the contrary, he was a little excited. In Xiaochen's opinion, as long as he could increase his strength, enduring a little pain was nothing at all, as long as it wasn't painful. Because of Xiaochen's arrival, the Heavenly Thunder realm became extremely lively. Countless heavenly thunders seemed to have completely awakened as they continuously struck Xiaochen's body. However, Xiaochen was even more like a madman. Under the baptism of the heavenly thunder, the corner of his mouth actually revealed a hint of a smile. Xiaochen and Tianyu entered the Heaven Thunder world and the Heaven Domain Mystic realm respectively. Both of them were preparing for the great changes that were about to happen in the North Star boundary. The current situation in the North Star realm was pretty much clear. The Holy Palace, Nine Heavens, Liwang Sect, and Supreme Deity Sect were in a four-way alliance, while the Night Ghost Pavilion, Myriad Beast Valley, and Heavenly Demon Sect were in a three-way alliance. The seven quasi-saint sects had formed two great alliances. With this, an unparalleled great battle that would engulf the entire North Star realm was clearly not far away. Similarly, this battle had also determined the situation and direction of the entire North Star realm. Unaware of what was happening in the outside world, Xiaochen was completely immersed in his cultivation in the Heavenly Thunder world at this very moment. 3 days after Xiaochen entered the Heavenly Thunder world, Supreme Sovereign Tianyun left Nine Heavens and headed towards the Holy Palace. A small starship secretly left Nine Heavens with one of the three quasi-saint great sovereigns of Nine Heavens, Supreme Sovereign Tianyun, sitting on it. Not only Supreme Sovereign Tianyu, Supreme Deity Sect and Liwang Sect also each had a starship that set off on the same day and headed straight for the Holy Palace with quasi-saint great sovereigns sitting on it. Supreme Deity Sect had sent Supreme Sovereign Adam, who was already very familiar with the Holy Palace, while Liwang Sect had sent Supreme Sovereign Hegemen Peak, who had previously been in contact with the Holy Palace. The Sadata Holy Sect had sent their quasi-saint great sovereigns to the Holy Palace to discuss the details of the alliance. At the same time, the Holy Palace had already made preparations for this four-way meeting. This meeting was different from the past. In the past, everyone had only sent a few saints, and at most, it was only between the holy sons and holy daughters. But this time, it was a meeting between the quasi-saint great sovereigns of the four quasi-saint great sovereigns. As such, it was naturally extremely important. In the Holy Palace, the entire Holy Palace, including the Heavenly Qin continent, was under martial law. Dozens of saint great sovereigns were assigned to various parts of the Heavenly Qin continent, responsible for monitoring every movement. In addition, the Holy Palace had already made corresponding arrangements to welcome the quasi-saint great sovereigns of the three quasi-saint great sovereigns. Time passed day by day. 7 days later, Supreme Sovereign Hegemen Peak of the Liwang Sect was the first to arrive. Xiaoxing personally came out to welcome him and arranged accommodations for him. 10 days later, Supreme Sovereign Adam of the Supreme Deity Sect arrived. Similarly, Xiaoxing personally came out to welcome him. Half a month later, Supreme Sovereign Tianyun of the Nine Heavens, who was the furthest away, arrived. As such, after half a month, the quasi-saint great sovereigns of the four quasi-saint great sovereigns of the four quasi-saint great sovereigns finally gathered. After a night's rest, the meeting was scheduled to take place the next day. The location of the meeting was naturally the main hall of the Holy Palace, the Sacred Hall. The Sacred Palace was extremely quiet that night. Many Sacred Palace disciples were very cautious, not daring to act rashly. It couldn't be helped. Now that the quasi-saint great sovereigns of the four quasi-saint great sovereigns had gathered in the Sacred Palace, anyone who dared to cause trouble during this special period would definitely be courting death. It wasn't just the Sacred Palace disciples. Even the people who came with Adam and the other two quasi-saint great sovereigns were incomparably low-key and quiet. They didn't even take a step out of the door. It couldn't be helped. The pressure from the meeting of the quasi-saint great sovereigns was too strong. It was no exaggeration to say that this meeting would determine the future structure of the North Star boundary. The night felt extremely long for everyone in the sacred palace. While many people were suffering, the first ray of sunlight finally spilled over the land. As the sunlight scattered, the sacred palace began to move like a giant beast that had just awakened. Half-saint elders constantly entered and exited the sacred hall, making the final preparations for the meeting of the quasi-saint great sovereigns. At this time, there were a total of 7 luxurious jade tables and chairs in the center of the sacred hall. The exquisite and translucent tables and chairs made it obvious at a glance that they were definitely of extraordinary value. At the same time, there were fine wine, spirit fruits, side dishes, and so on the tables. Obviously, the sacred hall didn't want to be too boring while the quasi-saint great sovereigns were discussing. People continued to enter the sacred hall. It wasn't until 2 hours later that the sacred hall finally quieted down. All the half-saint elders had retreated, but a total of 20 sacred palace saint venerables stood guard around the sacred hall. The 20 saint venerables surrounded the entire sacred hall so tightly that not even a fly could pass through. With such a force, even a fly wouldn't be able to fly through. Begging for collection, begging for monthly votes, begging for recommendations. End of chapter. You're tuning into the Mythic Realms YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.